wasn't.
You were not the last, you were one of the
If you
first.
had a reserved parking spot, you would have been on hand.
No, I actually had one at Applebee's, as it turns out. You're very accommodating. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody.
So Robert and Joe, I need you to sign this, I think I was gonna do it last time, it's the articles of incorporation, you approved them, and we need the signatures. Does anybody need a copy of the board materials? I have one copy of the packet, I can make more. I have 3 copies of the cost and quality, I can make more. Okay, so at the moment. Awesome.
All right.
That was me.
Thank you.
All right.
Copies of the agenda.
Everyone have an
Yeah.
agenda?
Do you have copies that our guests might have?
Absolutely.
I just want,
one. You can do-
you guys can sit next to each other if you want.
Elizabeth can have mine if she gets it back when she leaves. I have it electronically.
Did you get that?
Okay.
Yes.
All set?
Just get the door so you don't bug Lisa too much. Thank you, Joe.
We're convening at all of 3:30 after 1 on March 6th. Are there any members of the public who have a comment they would like to make?
I do know.
Anybody else? Okay. Go for it.
Great. Regrettably, I am, if you pass those out, I am here to file a formal complaint based on my attendance at the meeting on January 30th in reference to what I believe was a violation of open meeting law. And I won't go through the details in this note, I'll just make copies for folks, but this refers to the break that was taken while there was a motion under, on the table, and it was in reference to some deliberations that occurred outside the public meeting, and that clearly is a violation of public meeting law. I also believe that there was violation of VEHI's board's own code of ethics policy, specifically the duty of loyalty and duty of obedience, and the conflict of interest policy, and I refer to implementation items 1, 5, and 6. I witnessed basically that there was a subset of the board that left the meeting, and there were some deliberations that occurred in private, and while there was a motion on the table, despite the current chair's objection to that, and open for discussion about the request. So what I'm asking for at this point is the VEHI board take a formal vote sanctioning that activity in violation of the open meeting law, and also to go on record that board meeting discussions, excluding those warned agenda items covered by executive session, will take place in public in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I want to wait for Laura as we talk about the, before we get to the minutes, but we can review the agenda. It's been through pretty extensive formulation. Does anybody have any comments, additions to make to the agenda?
I do. I would like to ask that, move that item 12, the proposed changes to the I-90-1 rules, be deleted from the record. I'm concerned that that was not added to the agenda following the protocol that we agreed to, and may have been also associated with a either an improper delegation of authority by the board that should have been a delegation by the board chair rather than the board as a whole, or an unclear assumption of responsibilities by members of by trust administrators.
Unclear what? What was the last word you used?
By
Unclear?
trust administrator that's inconsistent with the direction of the president.
I'm sorry, I understood the first part, but I just don't understand what you mean by the last couple of clauses. With your reference to trust administrators, I didn't get the verb that you used to describe what you
Inappropriate assumption of responsibility,
mean by the trust administrators
yes.
and
And/or inappropriate delegation of authority by the board chair.
you, Tracy, excuse me, this is a clarification question. You mentioned the president in juxtaposition with the trust administrators, and I'm trying to understand what that meant.
I'd be happy to discuss that at a future agenda item. The long and short of it is, I think this is an inappropriate item, and I move to have it deleted.
Okay. Any discussion?
I second that. I need a second.
I'm not in charge.
I know.
If I just want to make sure that I understand what's going on here. Robert and I asked for this addition to the agenda, and you're objecting to it. Is that correct?
I am.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Okay, any discussion? Fran?
I'm sorry, I don't understand why.
I don't think Robert agreed to it as an agenda item.
Well, maybe we should ask Robert.
What I got back from Joel and said was, I think the issue was not the specific comments offered on I-90, but the issue raised three broad issues, which I would support. I don't think we could do it today, frankly, in 5 minutes. But what I said to Joel in my email to him was, I think there are issues we have not gotten to as a board yet, specifically who on the board is authorized to ask the staff to do what, because the structure is somewhat nebulous. And what is the relationship among the staff members in terms of, is there a hierarchy? What is the ordering? I also said that as a personal matter, and I was speaking for myself, I have no objection to staff presenting dissenting or differing views on a particular issue and letting the board decide if that is what the staff has decided to do. It wasn't clear to me in this instance that the staff was deciding that. So quite frankly, I would like to have a discussion on those issues, and I don't think respectfully it can be done effectively in 5 minutes. So for me, item 12 is more a placeholder.
May I ask a question of the experts in the room that have such about this? In a review of the agenda, are we authorized to add items to the agenda? And therefore, we are capable of deleting items from the agenda as well. That's a head nod, I'm gonna take that as authoritative.
It needs to be done at the beginning of the meeting. Additions and
I got the
deletions.
answer I needed, thank you. I mean, I understand.
May I give a full answer, please?
What?
May I give a full answer? A full response?
Yeah.
Thanks. So amendments to an agenda need to be done at the beginning of the meeting.
Right.
They can be done as additions or deletions. However, additions to the agenda, particularly those that require action, are strongly discouraged, as they should be clearly warned well in advance of the meeting so that the public has knowledge of what decision items might be coming.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's not a blanket best practice, do whatever you want at the start of the meeting. Best practice is, if you know you need to take action, it's best if it's properly warned.
Who added this item to the agenda? Forward, was it you, Laura?
Who typed it in?
Yeah.
I typed it in with your direction.
Did I answer?
And Robert, we both asked that this item be
Yes.
added to the agenda. Okay. You have a question you want to ask? or-
No, merely to clarify, so I said, as I said to you, I thought the discussion transcended the specifics of the,
And you'll know
Right.
to the group that I agreed with you.
but I recognize that the time squeeze, I don't think it could credibly be addressed in 5 minutes, but.
I understand that too. Any discussion can be, takes more than 5 minutes. That being said, we may not get to it anyway,
Can I have another question?
but yes,
Is there any deadline that we have to meet
yes,
for anything being approved to be sent to somebody?
yes. We don't know precisely what it is, but we believe it will be prior to the next meeting of this board. So in the absence of any further discussion, I guess, Laura, as a starting point, if someone wants a roll call for each and every item, we'll continue to do it, each and every item request. But that's not decided right now, that would be subject to a discussion. So I guess I'll ask that, not a vote on this motion, it is conducted by it being done by roll. And I will lead the roll call. Is there any further discussion?
Can we restate the motion?
The
to
motion,
delete
as I
item-
understand it, is without characterization to delete item 12 from today's agenda.
Thank you.
The chair votes no. This is my first. I don't know which order to go in. So I'll go around the table rather than alphabetically. Robert?
No.
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 Yes.
Yes.
Could I add that
So that's 4-2.
it might be inappropriate for the chair to vote unless there's a tie?
You'll have to get a new chair.
You could talk about that.
Yeah, I don't, can you find the authority for that one? And I'll be happy to.
Sure, it's in the Secretary of
I
State's
find
guide.
it for me, I'm happy to look at it. But, you know, one reason I find that inapplicable to us is that our chosen decision-making method does not result in ties unless there is a vote by the chair. So that would mean that the chair can't vote.
So I guess my understanding of how we make decisions based on what we agreed upon last time is not clear then, if that's the interpretation that some folks have, because it's different from my interpretation. Just like I'm feeling like the agreements we had about agenda development may not be clear, because it doesn't seem like that agreement was followed. So I'll mention it now, but I will definitely mention it again in the agenda development section, that I would like to see a review of those agreements, a review of the role of chair, a review of open meeting law, and a review of our decision-making protocols.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the agenda? Hearing none, let's move on to approval of the January 30th meeting minutes. I don't mean to, but I suspect that my work will end up dominating this discussion. But before we get to the memo that I distributed to you all, my question is, are there any proposed changes to the unapproved minutes that you have in your mind? Seeing none, I guess I'll move on to the proposals that I made. This issue is also one that begs a longer discussion that I think is readily resolvable, frankly, when we get to it. But the notion of reviewing the process for the review of unapproved minutes is item 14 on today's agenda, so I may not be able to resolve this generalized issue more quickly than either the end of this meeting or perhaps the next meeting. You all have the memo that I submitted to you. If you don't, it's because it wasn't included in the board packet. So I guess we'll make copies of it.
I only bring what's in the board packet, sorry. I don't have a copy.
You don't have, I'm sorry.
I don't have a copy of the memo.
There you go.
I only bring what's in the board packet.
I'll hold off until Laura comes back.
Can you tell me the date of the memo?
I think I distributed to you all yesterday.
Yes, I understood it.
I just gave my copy away, so I don't know what date it is, but it's either Monday or
By
Tuesday.
email?
Yes.
Yesterday?
Yes.
I definitely do.
Okay. So, my personal life is quite good. If I have a tan, it's because I was in Key West. If I have a smile, it's because I visited the grandkids last week in Maine.
It's always comfortable.
And if I have a smirk, it's because I'm leaving for the Caribbean on Saturday.
Where?
St. Lucia.
I heard they had a massive snowstorm.
You heard wrong.
Followed by a tidal.
You heard wrong.
Although, we were talking about schadenfreude, I have a close friend of mine retired from Vegas. Grew up with me in Montreal, and got the cold and snow 2 weeks ago. He texted me and said, "Don't you ever get sick of winter?" I don't, but I said, I know there's people already do. And 3 days later, they got 6 inches of snow in
In
Vegas.
My, under that same head, my daughter and son-in-law and the grandkids, the week I was in Key West, we were out in the Grand Canyon. And they were in Flagstaff. They got out of Flags, they booked it out of Flagstaff immediately prior to the single largest snowstorm Flagstaff, Arizona has ever recorded, 39 inches.
39.
39
Oh my
inches.
word. That's big anywhere.
Yeah, seriously.
I would start with that. So that's your 2 pages right there. And I put it on 1 page,
All right.
back to back, so I'll send some that way, and some, and then I ran out of paper on the copier, so I had to do the tray, it's one of those things.
All right.
There are bales.
There's no only this one. Oh, no, it's not, because I
I fear this can take some time, and I'm sorry for that.
I haven't actually.
Some of you are a bit, I perceive, annoyed at the notion of dealing with corrections to the minutes in this manner. I thought writing it down would make a lot more sense than trying to just address it orally, and that's why I sent it to you. I dated it today, because today's the meeting day, and I sent it yesterday, or Monday. If you can refer to the minutes, do y'all have the minutes?
Just to be clear, I didn't wish a motion, there's not a motion on the floor at this point.
Thank you.
Is
I
that
appreciate
correct?
that. I appreciate that. As I've thought about this, with special attention, Laura, to the minutes taker, it wasn't quite clear how I should proceed. So I guess what I will do is make a motion that the several
The
proposed.
board chair doesn't make a motion typically. Sorry, just thinking out of all the meetings I've ever attended, the board chair
Yes, well,
typically does not make a motion.
let me just ask that you not interrupt me any more than you would interrupt any other chair. If you raise your hand, point of order or something. I'm unfamiliar with the law that says that a chair cannot provide a motion. I'm more than willing to have someone who hasn't read this make the motion for me and second it. We can do that. So,
I'm happy to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Then I'll second it, and now we can have discussion, right?
okay.
Yes.
Is everybody happy with that?
Yes.
Good. So now we
So
go,
this is up to you.
so now we have the
This is up to
discussion.
you. Yes, we can now have a discussion. Are there any proposed amendments beyond what appears before you in the memo that I prepared? Okay.
I don't, point of order,
Yeah.
we made a motion, second, so we can have discussion about the minutes.
Yes.
Concerns about changes to the minutes don't have to be formal motions right now. So you can raise these issues with us, and then,
I thank you very much. All right. Martha, is it appropriate for me to comment on the minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, then I will do that. Okay. There are five points, thank you for clarifying that I tried to raise immediately after the last meeting. The first is the statement that appears on page 2 under the heading Act to Amend Articles, etc., in which it is said that per DFR, member districts will need formal notice of these changes and the opportunity for input. My question is not whether it is a good idea to provide notice and opportunity to be heard. My question is whether our regulatory agency actually requires it. And I'm unaware of any requirement, and I've asked if it's required, and I don't have it, I don't know the answer. So if I'm wrong, then this one goes away. Let me go through the, well,
You don't wanna take them one at a time?
let's do one at a time. Yes, Laura?
So as the person who wrote the minute and deals primarily with DFR, I would say requires is not the right word. I think expects is the right word.
Good.
They do expect it, they've said that out loud, they've said it in communication, but I don't think it is technically required, so I think
Good.
that's a better word.
Thank you. The reason I made an issue of it is that I don't think it's wise for a public body to characterize what another public body says or does as a requirement unless it actually is a requirement. That's all there is to it.
How will the sentence change?
Where is it? Yeah,
You said yours per DFR,
member districts.
that's what
I would have been happy to delete the per DFR sentence altogether, but
Well, I think with the will
I think it would be
need-
perfectly appropriate instead to offer an amendment that says that DFR expects VEHI to provide, would that work?
formal notice.
Formal, et cetera. Would that be
It
all right
would,
to do?
yeah, I would think that's a
Okay,
correct
so I will now.
sentence.
All right, so how would you like to proceed with a motion regarding this one?
No, you usually go through and
Just
make
keep
all
going.
that.
Yes,
Alright,
the
let's
motion that's on the table is approval of the minutes.
Right.
And then you
And then-
And then you'll
we will
approve them as
accept
modified.
As modified or not.
Unless there's an objection to the modification.
Okay.
Thank you. The second issue or matter has to do with the fact that the vote on the selection of the election of the chair and, as it turns out, vice chair, was not recorded. Laura properly points out that the law requires only up and down references in the minutes unless otherwise requested. I have been under the impression that VEHI had long established a practice of recording votes that are not by consensus. I apparently was incorrect, that was a temporary understanding a few years ago. So I guess my request is that we specify in the minutes the vote on that particular matter, as though a roll call had been requested. If that's inappropriate, so be it. Okay, that's the second item.
I still haven't found it.
Oh,
Just
I
where it says the
apologize.
motion passed,
On page 3.
or the motion failed,
The motion did not pass.
which page are you
It
on?
was,
Page
it was
three.
page 3, I
Right on.
apologize.
Board middle of the page,
Board
board discussed
discussed
the
the
motion, motion did not
And
pass.
that short paragraph in the middle.
Oh,
So my request would be to modify that by recording by noting how the vote went.
Forgive me, Ian, listening, did you say on a one-time basis, or this will be the practice going forward?
For the time being, there's no motion about providing a new default mechanism, so this is a one-time basis for the moment.
I personally feel, and I can't cite the location, but my personal recollection is that the request for a roll call vote should be made at the time.
You're right.
And it's probably not appropriate to do that retroactively, especially since I can't even remember.
Then, if that's the case, then what I would like to do, and I'll probably provide a motion to that effect, is have the minutes of this meeting reflect that the vote at the last meeting was, the specific votes of that last meeting. You can reject that if you want, but my motion will be to specify in the minutes of the March 6, 2019 meeting, the roll call vote
Today's.
that occurred on January 30th.
So will you bring that up after we finish this?
I just wanted that.
So there's not consensus to make any change in how the vote was recorded at this time, is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay.
My third point is also on page 3, and it is the paragraph in which the 10-minute break was discussed, which is a couple of paragraphs down from the prior item. And it has to do with the inclusion of an opinion without, at all, or at least the inclusion of opinion without a counter opinion being provided. And so all I'm suggesting is that we can eliminate the entire paragraph or delete the second sentence in the paragraph. It's a 2-line paragraph. Or add to the paragraph with a response that I provided. This is not verbatim what I said, but essentially what I said in response to the notion that it's best practice to talk items through together.
I'm just curious, what was your response?
That the response was, this is designed to get us to an amicable decision, which it frankly did as soon as we came back. And sort of, the backdrop for that was this. Now, the motion that was considered last time was nominally under my name. It was a matter that Peggy, Fran, and I brought to the attention of the board we would be presenting in October and in December. And I felt constrained to converse with the two of them before offering what ultimately was the compromised resolution of that item last time. That's why we left.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought the term amicable decision was appropriate.
So,
Basically, it's just that I don't know why minutes include a reference like this anyway. So, but if they're going to include that reference, then there should be some acknowledgement that there was a response to your indication.
so, I would be comfortable with that only if it also indicated that you also said, well, fine then, I'll take a break to clear my head.
That's why things like this don't belong in minutes, right?
I think that I prefer the minutes stay as they are.
Fourth item is, has to do with not the fact that Elizabeth Fitzgerald requested the opportunity to provide comments and was given it, but that the content of her comments were provided in these minutes. I went through the last three years of board minutes and found 3 references to public comments. The first was Steve Stitzel, whose comments were characterized as conveying a sense of his experience around a matter relating to the CB words, collective bargaining, without characterization. The second was a question by Chris Hood last year, inquiring as to the source of funding for the services of the law firm that VEHI engaged to follow the discussion that ultimately, frankly, led to Act 11. And while the minutes recorded what I imagine would have been the response to his question, they are written in a way that doesn't distinguish the question heard from the answer heard. But the comment was purely a question. The third was Nicole Mace in December 20th, where she indicated she'd be taping this meeting and announcing that Elizabeth was resigning and that Robert was being appointed in his place, and that's obviously appropriate to note in the minutes. That's it. And so when I read this one, Let's see.
It's the bottom of page 3, second paragraph.
Yeah, I see an inclusion and incorporation of this concern about a 10-minute break. That's part A. Part B is that the location of this entry in the minutes is simply incorrect. It is inserted in the minutes above the portion of the minutes that detail that a decision was made, when I distinctly recall that we had already reached a conclusion about the item, and that Elizabeth's comments followed conclusion of the meeting.
So just to be clear, because you raised this with me and I re-listened to the tape, because I taped it like I am tonight,
Yeah.
so I can, this is a
Two tapes.
confusing meeting to,
Two recordings, okay.
well, I didn't watch the video.
Yeah, we should know that.
But,
I'll speak louder.
so anyway, this is when she said what she said. I agree, she spoke about her experiences with co-leadership positions after the vote to not move to co-chairs, but it is when she said it.
Okay. Not my memory, but that's fine.
Well, I
I'm not-
didn't
I'm not
trust my own,
disputing
so
it.
I listened to it to make sure.
Anyhow, so I guess that, then the proposal to change the minutes in my mind is to remove the entry in its entirety, or let it stop before she also expressed concern sentence. The fifth and last one is simply what I think is a typo.
It's not,
It's
it
not
means
never
data
like
path.
Oh,
Doesn't, it's a
My-
DPAS, which is, it should be a capital S,
yeah.
it's for data path,
If you
it's
wouldn't-
not a TPA issue.
The way mine's
I don't know, it's their acronym,
Data Path Administrative Services.
sorry,
Oh,
I don't know.
no, it's a, I know it's a little S, so I thought maybe that's.
Well, it
what
should be a
is.
big
Well, here's the
S.
thing, I'm not gonna apologize for not knowing.
No, you shouldn't apologize for not
So I
knowing.
It
guess-
should be a big S,
So I
that's
guess
all.
my suggestion is frankly to spell it out, because somebody's gonna read these minutes someday in the future, and so
Right,
why
no,
don't they just say
That's fine, you can
TPAs?
say data path.
And where does that?
I think, Joel, on page 4, the appoint elect, you didn't point to, but you're correct on that. You actually elected for chair and vice chair, you didn't appoint them, and that was also technically my bad, and you should formally change the
I
minutes, I
see
believe.
that, and the reason I slept over it because the posted materials. include
I tried to
that
reflect
change.
that already.
There you have it, those are my thoughts about whether we should adopt the minutes without change. So I guess I'll ask for a motion, and if there is one, I'll make it myself.
There's a motion
There
on
is a
the
motion.
table.
Yes,
The question is
to
whether
amend, yeah.
who made the motion would accept those as friendly, to accept the
I'll
motions
do
with the
that, but
changes.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer. Tracy, you made the motion, will you accept the modifications?
I accept the modifications that we agreed to. The first one around rewording
Okay,
DFR expects VEHI to provide formal notice. The rest, I don't.
What about elect versus appoint and spelling out data path?
Where
Well,
are those
I-
exactly?
There's a left versus.
Page 4, the chair and the vice
Oh,
chair
those
were
two
elected.
already?
I did a
Those are
track
fine.
change in there, but
Yeah.
technically I did it wrong.
I accept those.
Where is data path?
It's on page 6. Right in the middle.
And I already
Oh,
made
I
the yes
can't
capital.
find it. There we go.
Coincidentally, I was distracted briefly. We have no water at one of my schools either, so I feel great synergy with the Visbit building as we're navigating.
Is it a water main issue?
Page 6 in the middle of the page, it
But we're
says it
out.
starts with Mark Page and Bobby Joe Salter.
Okay, I found it, thank you.
okay, the motion on the floor remains, or I guess is modified in the three ways we just described. The motion is to adopt the minutes as they appear, to adopt the unapproved minutes as they appear in our materials, as modified by the stated change to the reference to DFR's expectation as opposed to requirement, to the fact that the chair and vice chair are elected, not appointed, and the reference to data path being spelled out. Peggy?
Sorry, a little further discussion. Based on the fact that the paragraph referencing Elizabeth's comments isn't consistent with the board's past practice, I'm curious if these stay in here, is this going to adjust our practice then going forward, that everything stated by members is going to have to be spelled out in some way, or return to the practice that the board had held for years, I guess?
So is it okay if I speak to my experience with boards?
Yes, but also your experience with this board.
Sure. My experience, they both go together.
There you go.
My experience with this board is that there's been very little public attendance at this meeting, and on the rare occasions when there is, there isn't always comment. So this isn't a body that often deals with public comment. But in other boards that I have been party to, and based on my understanding of what is good practice for meeting minutes and public comment, it is appropriate and important to note the public comment that was made in the minutes, since that is one of our obligations as a body subject to open meeting law. And there's two places and ways that happens. It happens when folks are taken or given the opportunity to speak at the beginning of the meeting, open public comment, but also it's good practice before a body takes action on a motion, since mostly what you talk to at the beginning of the meeting is something not on the agenda, to see if there's any public comment that the board might want to consider before taking action on the motion. So it does appear in minutes in other places, in those places. The chair does have the discretion to limit public comment just to the beginning of the meeting if you want, being clear that that's the time that people can speak to items on the agenda. But again, most boards I'm experienced with take general public comment in the beginning and comments specific to items on the agenda at the time of the agenda.
I don't want to extend this any longer than necessary, Tracy, but what's your advice with respect to opinions offered by actual members of the board itself as appearing in minutes? The reason I ask, quite obviously, I think, is there's something, the juxtaposition is a little jarring for someone, either someone well acquainted with this board or the board, whichever board it is, to have his or her say recorded in the minutes about a particular issue and not have the actual members of the board able to have their opinions registered in the minutes. So that's the basis of the question.
In either case, the minute should not necessarily be a transcription of the comments made or the discussions made, but it certainly should identify the topics raised, any major points of discussion, and the disposition of whatever the item is.
Okay, Robert?
Just briefly to say, I mean, my feeling is that the minutes could be more, I would say, cryptic, and that might help us avoid some of these things. I'm with Tracy. I think I hear what you're saying, and I would say I'm not one for carve-outs, but I think when a public member takes the effort to come out here, I see your point about there being a glaring contrast, but I would say, for the most part, I would not be opposed to minutes that are more cryptic along the lines of what Tracy just said. But if someone takes the time and effort to come out and speak to us, I think both in a general sense and certainly from a statutory sense, we should record what they say. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. So we are zeroing in on some of this, Peggy.
So, not sure if this is an amendment, a motion, or what. And looking at Elizabeth's paragraph then, can we strike the ending part, which is not a negotiating body? We're factually stating that she provided comments, that she shared experiences with co-leadership, and she expressed concern over 10-minute break and the concept of caucuses. Should the sentence end there? The implication as you read into it is that we were trying to function as a negotiating body, when in fact we were trying to come up with a proposal that would in fact move us forward, which is still my hope, that we're gonna keep moving forward. Is that something that would help in any way?
Just ending that sentence at the word board.
Sure. Yeah. Would that still accurately reflect what Elizabeth shared, but keep it more to the point and not the implication of, could be just me reading into it?
Where did you want to add the period?
After word board,
Tracy, it's
followed
just a
behind board.
deletion of the clause beginning with which at the end of that sentence.
Oh, deleting which is not a negotiating
Yes.
body?
Would
I will
that help?
accept that.
Thanks.
Any objections to that change? All right, I think we are then left with just two additional concerns. How would you like to proceed? Would you like to vote on the motion as it stands, or shall we amend it? Shall we have it amended?
I'm okay with accepting those as friendly amendments if my seconder is, and we can approve the minutes as amended.
Forgive me, could you recapitulate which ones we've all agreed to? Because
Yes.
I brought up my red pen.
Well, let me try it, and Laura, you're doing the note-taking,
Yeah.
so you better have
On
this
page 2.
accurately with me, so let's see if we have it together. This is not a complete rendering of the issues before us, but the matters that I believe are the subject of consensus to change the minutes are the reference to TFR's expectation rather than requirement, the reference to election of the chair and vice chair and that appointment, and the deletion from the reference to Elizabeth Fitzgerald's comment of the last clause, which is not a negotiating body.
And spelling out
And
DEA.
spelling out
And spell,
DPA.
yes,
Yep.
thank you, and spelling out DPA.
I guess I seconded it.
Mhm.
I'm still concerned, with, still concerned with that piece about requesting the 10-minute break, discuss it, and then, Tracy indicating, I would either just leave that we took a 10-minute break, should be sufficient for the minutes. If more is needed, what did I just do here? Yeah, I would just, or add, see, to add about Joel responding, and the whole thing just has, it's more information that needs to be in the minutes because it raises all sorts of, it needs all sorts of explanation. The minute you start having to explain what went on, it gets very convoluted for a set of minutes. There was a 10-minute break, that's fine to have in the minutes. The reason for it and the response to it is misleading here because it doesn't really address what the whole issue was. It doesn't address the fact that Peg and I had brought the motion to, about how to choose chair and vice chair, and therefore we needed to regroup to figure out, okay, how could we move this thing forward? If everything we say, if this is gonna be an open meeting and in the minutes, okay, but just be prepared for things that are gonna be critical and create sort of more issues that need to be discussed if you wanna be effective and efficient in moving things forward. So I would just say there was a 10-minute break for consultation, if you need to say anything in there. But otherwise, I can't second you if you don't want to address and change the way this is included in the minutes.
Well, I would say it's very relevant to be in the minutes as we've received a formal complaint that we need to consider and evaluate fully as a board in a future meeting. And at that point in time, additional context can be explored, discussed, shared if needed, and if appropriate, will be part of a future set of minutes.
Well, then, let's put in everything that happened that led up to that discussion, which gets more to
I think
the fact that we should be adding in that Joe responded that the purpose of the requested break was to facilitate the board reaching amicable. If we put that in, then okay.
As long as we also put in that Joel said, then I changed my reason for requesting a break to be to clear my head. I don't wanna, I'd rather move forward and recognize that that's an issue we have to deal with as a board, acknowledge it, and have a future conversation. I don't think it's productive to dive deeply into the he said, she said. In the minutes, I do think the information that's included is appropriate.
So, if I understand it right, Tracy, you just want the minutes to reflect what she said.
I want the minutes to reflect what they say right now, and recognize that we will likely have a full discussion in the future.
Right, but the minutes as written, you'll acknowledge are one-sided.
I'm not acknowledging that they're one-sided, I think they're,
Well, then where do you see anything about he said in the minutes? There's just the she said, right?
you said you wanted a break, I said it was inappropriate.
Well, that's not responsive, but we'll move on, Robert.
Well, there may be, if I just step back for a minute, Joel, consensus that going down the road, we seem to agree that normally the minutes would not be a transcript. Given the overall situation, a little bit more detail here is antithetical to that, but I would, at the risk of being called hypocrite, I would support a little more detail, which makes this more, frankly, of a transcript. But in that case, if I pick up on Fran's point and Tracy's point, to add both sentences, and that would address your concern. It's not just what she said, it is what you said. I believe that is accurately what you said, but I again, forgive me for being repetitive here, going forward, I think we can talk about minutes that are, as I said, more cryptic, but I think in this particular situation, if you're insisting on, I won't say verbatim accuracy, but something that is closer in exactitude to what was said, both of your expressions could be included. Down the road, that's in future minutes, I think we agree that's gonna bog us down.
So you're suggesting we put in the sentence that Joel had printed here and the sentence, Tracy's sentence, I'm sorry, I don't recall the exact words.
Well, her reiteration of what Joel actually said.
Right.
And again, for two separate questions to discuss down the road, but the degree of detail, I think we will revisit.
But in order to get, I agree about the level of detail, but in order to
Yeah,
come to a conclusion on this, with the minutes, you're suggesting we put two sentences in.
well, if those are an accurate representation of what Joel actually said, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't recall.
At the end of the sentence where it says, after this discussion, Joel Cook requested a 10-minute break to talk this concept through to what was it you said? Facilitate reaching
an
agreement?
amicable decision.
Facilitate the board reaching an amicable decision.
And that I indicated that the best practice of the board is to talk
Absolutely.
items through together?
That was certainly one of my alternative proposals, so yes.
It's-
So, Tracy, I'm sorry,
Huh? I'm thinking,
you're thinking?
Yeah.
Few people.
so, I'm happy to have the minutes amended to add, to talk this concept through. With whom did you wanna talk them through?
So now you're asking us to recreate,
No.
check the
Well,
tape.
and maybe I won't.
Tracy,
Then maybe I
let's-
won't be okay with them then. I'm just trying to figure out a way to make it clear.
So
The
It's to
long
talk
and
the
short of it-
concept through,
Yeah.
to reach an amicable,
Yeah, those
Agreement.
words are how Laura characterized what happened.
Yeah,
Right,
I understand.
okay. So I'm not quite sure how to answer it.
I'm thinking aloud. I
Yeah.
apologize if that's frustrating to others. I'll stop.
No.
You had the, you said,
No, I'm gonna stop. I'm not sure that I
well
can.
then how does your motion stand at this point?
My motion stands as I left it,
With 4 changes?
And not touching
not touching.
this one? Then I will not, I withdraw my second.
I think you can not agree to the friendly amendments, and we can go back to the individual changes and take a shot at approving them individually. Sorry if I'm over.
A timeout on my part. This is why we have to talk through how minutes get posted.
Pardon me?
This is why we have to talk through our process for posting minutes. My contention is we could have avoided 90% of this discussion if we had been able to have a conversation about it before posting. I don't want to take any more time than is necessary here. So I guess my best approach here is to revert to where we were a minute ago before, Fran, you withdrew your second, and ask that with respect to this contention that we're facing about the 10-minute break, which calls to mind nothing more than a Friends episode that you'll all recall. We go on a break, never mind. That we
That's
have,
fine.
that we have the minutes of this meeting reflect that I said, for purposes of clarifying what appeared in the minutes of the January 30th meeting, that the purpose of that break was to enable the board to reach an amicable decision.
I'm not sure we can go there quite yet.
Can I ask, so this was a question, but maybe, so if your document, I'm unclear about the practice of attaching documents to minutes
Mhm.
because that came up and I'm not sure the board has given clear direction. And, doing that favors people to produce lots of documents to attach to minutes, which might be a slippery slope. But if you request that this gets attached to the minutes as opposed to being an advisory document that you're talking about, you may accomplish what you want.
Well,
Not appropriate.
Attached to these minutes of today. I need to know whether there's an expectation that this is a document that's being attached to the public record or
I
not.
understand, we're not there, we haven't considered this we haven't considered this document as a motion yet.
Is there a discussion of minutes on the agenda?
Yes,
Yes.
late in the agenda.
The 14th.
So I've suggested, what I've suggested with respect to resolving what may be the last item, which is simply to note for the record in the minutes of this meeting, that in the context of discussing, that in the context of approving the January 30th minutes, Joel, however he is characterized, pointed out that the purpose of that 10-minute break referred to in the minutes was to facilitate the board reaching an amicable decision. That way we can avoid worrying about verbatim restatements of what happened last time.
I would prefer that pursuant to the formal complaint we received from a member of the public, and given the discussion that we're having right now, that be a future agenda item, and in the context of that future appropriately warned agenda item, you have an opportunity to reiterate that, and we can have a full discussion of of that.
So, I understand, all right, you object to inserting in the minutes of this meeting a clarifying statement.
I do.
That's what you're objecting
I
to?
do, because I don't think that that's a true and accurate representation of the whole conversation, and I actually don't think that that will serve to move us forward as a board that works together to have conversations about hard things in the public as we're charged to do.
Okay,
Well, I would just, to pick up on that, one of the risks is for anyone who's following the paper trail, from the January 30th to whenever we get to this issue in future, they would then, if your comments were included, Joel, in these minutes, they would have to know that they have to scroll through the intervening.
well,
Meeting.
theoretically, these minutes could refer back to those minutes, but otherwise, I think you're right. The simplest approach would be to simply add to the minutes of the meeting in which this transpired. That-
Or, what I'm saying is if we're going to have a conversation at a future meeting, X, then someone who's following the paper trail from the January 30th to X would go to those two. But you were talking about putting in a comment on today's, I'm merely saying that that's,
You mean to say we couldn't just add a cross-reference to the minutes?
I suppose you could, I mean, I'm not up on
You don't think that's appropriate? Really? I mean, I'm asking you, you don't think it's appropriate to put a cross-reference to the minutes?
in today's minutes, saying what? You're saying, Clara?
Saying that in order to get us past this particular moment in time about the minutes of the January 30th meeting, that Joel asked that the minutes of this meeting reflect that the purpose of the requested break was to facilitate the board reaching an amicable decision. What is the damage to anybody in doing that?
In an attempt, is it accurate to say that the chair voiced objections to the characterization of the January 30th meeting, and the board agreed to put the item on a future agenda? Again, in the interest of trying to be a little less,
So it seems awfully confrontational to say the board objected without enlightenment when all I'm saying is that the minutes reflect a clarification. That's all. I don't understand. But be that as it may, I guess the motion on the floor is to adopt.
No, there is no motion on the floor because I withdrew my second.
That's right. Here we go.
I'm not sure you can withdraw your second.
Why not?
You
You
withdrew.
accepted,
You don't,
you accepted friendly amendments, but I don't accept them, so I can withdraw my second.
you don't accept the friendly amendments,
Amendments.
therefore, they aren't friendly amendments, therefore, any other amendments would need to be formally considered.
All right, so the motion on the floor is to adopt
The minutes.
the unapproved minutes as presented without change. Any further discussion about that? Martha, do you believe I can vote on this?
At this point, yes.
Tracy?
I don't think you need to vote on it unless, there's a tie among the members appointed by Vermont EDA based on how we decided
I'm
decisions should be
listening,
made.
I'm still not convinced about that, but
Oh, I'm sorry, when you asked the question, can you vote, I thought you meant, can we vote? I thought that's what the question you asked me, just for clarification.
all right, well, okay, well, you all know where we stand. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, well, I guess it's a language issue. All those in favor of approving the January 30, 2019 unapproved minutes,
As written,
as written.
aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Motion fails. now we are back to having no approved minutes.
We reached some agreements, I would like those at least included in there. So,
So I'll move approval of the minutes with amendments.
The four.
The four, which are I gotta find it.
DFR,
DFR.
elect versus appoint, spell out data path, remove negotiating body.
Yes,
With the understanding that the issue of the characterization of the 10-minute break is,
not in my motion.
it's not in the motion.
I second that motion.
Robert,
Four amendments, although the TPA one
The
actually.
modifications, not really
Modification.
amendments.
Right,
Yeah.
forgive me, the allusion to DPS comes before. Was it this one, does it not?
No,
No,
What's at the end?
No.
before.
I have them in the right order,
So
what
those
page number?
four, is
Pages
that,
2, 3,
what we're
4, and
at?
6.
Yeah, 20 are just those minutes
Okay.
with those, the minutes with those four adjustments.
Okay, then we need a motion,
No motion, we second,
then we need
call for
an
vote.
amendment. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion fails. The reason I vote nay is because I need to be,
Yes.
I
She
need,
voted yes.
Yes, so it passed.
No, it doesn't.
No, because Peggy said no and Joel said no. That's 2 no's on the.
I said, you said no, I said yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Yes, I
said.
said no.
you're interchangeable until you're not.
No, it's, I have to learn their voices when I'm not looking, I
I agree,
apologize,
I
which is
agree.
why you need roll call.
Right, there you go, all right. Well, so here we are. The reason I vote no is, of course, related to the absence of any reference to changing the item regarding the break. How would you like to proceed?
The unapproved minutes can stand
Just
on the
stand.
website unless and until we take it up again.
Without objection? Okay, now maybe we can get into some really heavy-duty discussions about matters that actually affect the people we represent. And let's move on to 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and see if we have any time left beyond that. Let's start with the formulary changes,
Yeah, you're the phone.
which is a discussion.
It's probably a good time to talk about drugs. You received from the management team 2 recommendations for changes to VEHI's pharmacy services. We also have some updated information for you in respect to those recommendations, as we promised. The first recommendation is that VEHI will move to Express Scripts National Preferred Formula, effective January 1 of 2020. This conversation between your management team and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont actually dates back at least to early 2018. It may even have begun in late 2017. It has come to fruition though at this point in time because in fact the formulary is in effect for the state of Vermont employees as well as for Vermonters who are on the state exchange. When we first began discussing it as a management team, we thought it would be prudent to see how this new formulary played out in other circles where it had been implemented. And upon further research and hearing from those in the formulary, we felt confident that we could recommend adopting the National Preferred Formulary. I trust you've had an opportunity to read the document. And essentially what this proposal does is give Express Scripts the authority, or already sort of has the authority, to remove from the formulary on an annual basis high-cost drugs that are not medically efficacious or not more medically efficacious than drugs that are on the formulary but cost less. So the purpose here is to direct people as much as possible in medically guided ways to high therapeutic value pharmaceuticals, and eliminate from the formulary high-cost drugs that are not bringing medical benefits to our members. There is an appeal process, as you can see from the document we sent to you, so that if there is a patient and or doctor who believes that the drug that is excluded from the formulary is medically efficacious for this particular patient, or that this patient should not be removed from using this drug for whatever medically sound reason, that person can go through the appeal process and can continue to receive access to that drug, provided that he or she wins on appeal. As I said, the formulary is already in effect for the state of Vermont employees and for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont exchange populations. It is also being used by a number of large clients in the Blues book of business. We also had a really good conversation yesterday with our consultants at Remedy Analytics, and they strongly endorsed this particular move. We also received new updated savings from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. I think it was yesterday.
Yes.
Just yesterday. The savings are actually significantly higher than we had been told. They are now in the neighborhood of $1.7 million just for the national preferred formulary, with the lion's share of those savings arising from the active population. There's a relatively small amount of savings for the retired system, about $75,000. The rest of those savings would be accrued by moving the active population to the national formulary. Again, there's a lot more information here, specifics about the exclusions, the rationale for it. I'd be happy to address any of that if you would like me to. But in light of what we learned from Blue Cross, in light of the experience of other groups, and the very strong thumbs up endorsement by Remedy Analytics, we believe this is a recommendation that makes a lot of sense for the trust. In terms of member involvement, obviously, rolling this out effective January 1 of 2020 will involve us doing a lot of advance work, as we said here in the draft, making sure letters go out to all the individuals who are going to be affected on the drugs that will be excluded. One of the ways that we really excel as a trust is in getting information out to people. There has been some problems, noise around this in other areas where this formulary is going into effect, only because I think the transition did not go as smoothly, the communications were not as well put together and delivered in a timely way as we will certainly do it. But we intend, if you adopt this proposal, to work very closely with Blue Cross and also with Remedy to make sure our communications are on point, the communications go out well in advance of the transition, and then we address any individual concerns that may arise from making the transition to the formulary. The second recommendation is to move patients who require certain high-cost specialty medications to a specialty network called Accredo. Some of our members have already voluntarily moved to the Accredo network. This network exists for the sole purpose of assisting individuals who have particular disease conditions that require extensive and often very expensive specialty medications. And this network also provides very extensive support services from doctors, nurse practitioners, people who specialize in these medical conditions and who make a point to reach out individually or as a team to the people who would be receiving medications through this network. Again, there's a lot of more information here. The Accredo, the medications that would come through Accredo, most individuals get them mailed to their home. They're specially packaged. You are notified in advance of the mailing. Again, those support networks are always in touch with you. You can also pick up the medication from certain select pharmacies, which we noted here in the memo to you. The savings attributed to the Accredo network are in the realm of $720,000. So it would be $720,000 plus $1.7 million for the National Preferred Formulary. Remedy expects that we would see savings in those areas on an annual basis. I asked specifically yesterday in our conversation that there was a sort of marked appreciation factor. Once you make the move to these formularies, you usually see the savings drop off significantly, and Remedy did not believe that would be the case. But they also, again, counseled the importance of making sure that you communicate very clearly and well in advance with all the affected individuals to make sure that you avoid any kind of hardship or misunderstanding.
So, a couple questions.
Sure,
A Credo is already out there and available.
that's correct, on a voluntary basis.
Okay, that was my question. So it's voluntary, and this
No.
makes it not
This would make it
voluntary.
mandatory,
And
correct.
so certain prescriptions would only be able to be filled through Express Scripts and or secondarily,
It'd be through the Accredo network.
right.
Or you, now again, you can pick them up either at these select pharmacies that would be
There's a
noted here.
handful of them on.
There's a
I get
handful of
one
them.
through Accredo, and I can refill through Express Scripts, and
Yes.
they kick it off in Accredo.
Right,
So the early interface is
critical.
just the same as it is anyway,
Right.
which is nice from the consumer side. And Accredo calls me every time somebody sneezes, so I can tell you that the customer service side
That's
is
what we've heard
almost
too, actually.
over the top.
The other thing Remedy
Like,
said
really?
was, Remedy also
Really?
really
I thought I told
stressed
you this
that,
was okay yesterday.
Remedy said unlike other networks and unlike normal pharmacies, all these folks do is specialty medications. All they do is focus on these really high-cost cases. And so they put an awful lot of emphasis on doing the job for that.
So Express Scripts, is it purely a mail? Like, will this eliminate the local pharmacy? You said a select.
If for the folks who will be served by the Accredo network, unless
What
they're
about the
picking up.
folks that are not served by the Accredo network, the general Express Scripts?
No, if you're just a normal, if you're not receiving a medication that Accredo provides, you'll continue to go to your pharmacy, just the way you, or you may be getting mail order as well.
So
But
this
you'll have
is-
a choice, but they have a
Yeah.
choice of mail order or
Yeah.
local pharmacy.
That's
So when
correct.
I need antibiotics, I say send that prescription to my local pharmacy. When I need my maintenance drugs, I say send it to Express Scripts. I'm not sure if all of our employees know that, and that's an area that maybe when we get more into employee education, we can
Right.
talk about,
Mhm.
but,
My experience with Express Scripts was purely through the mail, so that's why I didn't know
oh
if we
yeah,
were
it is only.
pushing
yeah,
everybody.
There's different mail order systems here. There's
Right.
mail order for what I'll call run-of-the-mill pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Then there's a mail order system, very specially delivered, packaged, et cetera,
Yeah.
for the specialty medications that serve people with HIV, hepatitis C, bleeding disorders, multiple sclerosis, that kind of thing.
And actually, Express Scripts is under every pharmacy we fill, I mean, if you go to Rite Aid,
Right,
Okay.
you just don't know it.
and what we're proposing here is
There are
for the
PBM.
regular medications, it's just moving people from the preferred to non-preferred.
No, what you're doing is you're moving everyone to what's called a preferred formulary. And the preferred formulary will have exclusions, and those exclusions will change from year to year as new drugs come online, as drugs go from being preferred to brand, or actually be branded preferred or preferred to generic. What's generally happening, we learned yesterday from Remedy, is that people on a national preferred formulary are usually being directed from one preferred medication to another preferred medication. In some cases, it's from one brand to another brand, or from a brand to a preferred. And there's even cases, it's rare, but it happens, where certain generics are even more expensive than the brand. And so this exclusive formulary would eliminate that more expensive generic and direct you to the less expensive brand or preferred medication.
Robert,
I had a few questions, so.
Sure. This is for discussion purposes, by the way, so we don't have to act on
we're
it.
gonna cut this off in like 6 minutes.
I'll be quick. So first question, page 4, the appeal process. So I'm thinking someone might appeal, not because they want to pay more, but they might have an allergic reaction to it.
Right.
What is the turnaround on the appeal process? Do you have any idea?
My understanding, I don't think I got an exact timeline from the Blues when I asked this question, but my understanding is that it's relatively quick. I don't think it's a delayed process at all. And also, the other reason why I'm confident of that is the number of people who actually appeal is pretty low. So you're not in a queue for a long time waiting for a response.
I had a question for Jennifer. This looks fine to me. I wonder, however, the extent to which this has implication for the readiness of the population that is being served. Do employees have the capacity to accept further changes of this nature so soon?
We had a lot of discussion on that. In fact, one of the reasons we didn't move sooner than this was because of that, as well as wanting to see how it played out other places. I actually talked with a union colleague at VSEA about this, because there was a lot of disgruntlement at the front end of this process at the state level. And I believe in part because the rollout was not as smooth as it might have been. I don't know the details, but that's the sense I have. But since that time, the state employee population has adapted, readily to this, and it's gone very well. Now, they also haven't gone through the kind of transition issues that our members have over the last 15 months. So we think that if we do the transition well, in terms of advanced communication, that we will avoid a lot of trouble. So that doesn't mean it might not be perceived as part of.
It will be.
Yeah.
I can promise you. The
It's
folks
also
I
very,
know
it's
will.
also very targeted, a
Yeah.
letter will go to someone that says your prescription A is going to be changed to prescription B. So it's very targeted, mailings as well, not just general, you might have a change.
Yeah, it's targeted people who we know are prescribed these
Yes.
medications.
Yeah.
Right.
I assume that population changes from month to month.
Sure.
And
And so when they bring a new prescription to the
we will
pharmacy,
learn
they would learn at that
through the
time, oh,
pharmacist.
Lipitor is not covered, Crestor is covered, like that kind of
It's
thing.
not a change.
All right, yeah, I think Martha had one
Okay.
before you.
I'm not sure. I was just gonna say, so, kinda lost my train of thought there, cause I think you carried on after I had my question. So for the actual individual, when they receive this letter, are they going to need to do something, or is it just, an automatic that when their prescription goes to the pharmacy, it will be a different?
There's also direct outreach to the providers as well. That's actually, I think, the first step.
Okay.
They go out, there's actually a personal visit to all the providers for the targeted patients that Bobby Joe referenced, followed up by a letter 90 days before the transition, and then a letter 30 days before the transition.
Okay.
So we'd be talking to both the medical community through Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we would be communicating to the target individuals.
So the Blues actually will visit every pharmacy,
No, we'll be visiting the doctors of the
The
patients who are affected.
every doctor.
Yes.
They said the detail.
They can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Robert and Tracy.
I'll be very quick, but one thing, one of the problems with the present system, I don't know about with respect to our members in general, there's a shocking lack of transparency for people in terms of what things cost. Does this, I mean, we're all clueless and quote insurance pays or whatever. Does this move that, the transparency needle forward in any way? More transparency or not? The other concern I have, and I don't think this is an issue, but I'm very concerned that this is not, yes, buying generics, and I'm all in favor of competition and going with the lower price competitor, but if you look at access to new medications, people living in the United States are head and shoulders above the rest of the world, precisely because this is a profitable market. So this isn't the precursor to something which is actually going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. In other
No,
words,
I don't think so at all. In fact, I'll give you an example. There's two forms of Lyrica.
Right.
There's Lyrica CR and what I'll call traditional Lyrica. Lyrica CR just releases its powers, if you will, over a longer period of time. It's no more medically efficacious than traditional Lyrica, but it's 50% more expensive, right, than Lyrica. Our hope is that, many years ago, Robert, we were notified by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont that our generic fill rate was significantly lower than its book of business. This is when Joe Zimmerman and I were the trust administrators. We saw the numbers, we were alarmed by it, and so we made a conscious effort to begin educating our members about the medical efficacy of generic medications. And now we're up into the mid-80s with our generic substitution rate, which is actually where the national rate is as well. So our members are not going to lose access to medicines that they need for their medical conditions.
No, I meant it in a macro sense, that the Lyrica Deluxe is more profitable. I'm merely making a statement. I hope the manufacturers of Lyrica Basic are making money, because if
I think they
they're not, then the next good drug doesn't come.
I don't know, I'm not real worried.
Okay, and did you answer the question on transparency that I had? I mean, will people know prices? Are they
So
gonna know this?
we talked about this yesterday. This is not going to make the price different for the member at the pharmacy. I mean, it might
Not different.
marginally every once in a while.
Visible?
It's not,
No.
this is not, so there's different ways you can impact pricing, right? And one is for the subscriber, but the other is to VEHI as a whole through rebates. And the way the national formulary is set up is that the price benefits come to VEHI through rebates, which is why we want a decision by April 29th, because if we're going to go there, we need to know that we're going to get more rebates so that we can
Got it.
build it into our next premium so that we're not charging our members more than they need to. There are other ways that we want to impact the members at the pharmacy through our tier drugs, through generics, but this is not one of them.
Okay,
That's what I was wondering too.
15 seconds.
So that was my question. Are
Oh,
this,
then it's been answered.
I think so. I wanna double check to make sure I
Keep going. I'm sorry.
understand. The estimated annual cost savings from these two components will accrue to VEHI, and it should show in premiums, and there should not be a market exchange, any market change in the experience of subscribers, other than they're gonna get a different prescription and maybe from a different vendor. They're not saving money.
As a general rule, people will not be seeing lower list prices at the pharmacy.
Or higher list prices.
Or
at the
higher,
pharmacy.
right, as a result of this particular.
That's what I wanted to
Yeah.
understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because,
Fran.
because people, where I would see a higher price is until I meet my
Your
Deductible.
deductible.
Correct.
So I would see a price, I potentially could see a price for something.
You probably see a lower one.
Well, that's it, I don't know if I'm gonna see
Well,
a lower or higher.
it varies, it really
A
varies.
lot of this has to do with diabetic strips. Instead of being able to get diabetic strips from any of 7 or 8 manufacturers, you're all gonna get them from one. You're gonna get a free meter to do those diabetic strips, and we're gonna get a rebate because we pushed everybody to one diabetic strip. And you might pay $50 now for your diabetic strips, actually they're free, so you won't see any price difference. We'll get rebates. To the degree that it was a drug that you were paying 50, you might pay 51, you might pay 49, but we're gonna get rebates, that allows us to lower people's premiums.
But that's where
Got it.
our member members would see a price
Potentially.
Yes.
Potentially.
Well, they're
Potentially.
their deductible, yes.
until they pay the deductible.
Final suggestion, since it's mine. Can you guys develop, or have you already developed a draft of an outreach?
We don't have a draft yet. We were waiting to see how the board reacted to this before we got into the communications end.
Too early to
It's
communicate
not a
now.
chicken and egg issue here. Will the board be less or more inclined to approve this if there is a rollout plan?
Well, I mean, we have a conceptual roll-off plan.
That's all. I'll leave it now.
We haven't written the documents, but
Got it.
we've discussed it, we've discussed doing a more enhanced rollout than Blue Cross did with their
It was
population.
just a general suggestion about, we're gonna vote on April 29th. That might be a question that, well, obviously I have in my mind.
Would it
Okay.
help the board for us to draft some communication to get a sense of what people will be reading?
That's just some idea. Okay,
Question mark, you said,
Yeah.
I didn't write it fast enough, we're moving from what, formulary to the preferred
You're
formulary?
moving from the current Express Scripts formulary.
Open.
It's an
It's
Or
an
it's
open
open formulary to
You get any
a
drug you
national
want.
preferred formulary, which has exclusions, and those exclusions change on an annual basis. No, that's fine.
There's a whole lingo to
thank you
one
guys.
thing.
This is good stuff, I think, if I can speak informally and formally at the same time. That's a helpful to everybody kind of notion. The next item is the mythical net position policy, which is also subject of 15 minutes of discussion today and not decision. It begins and ends with the word reserve. How much money or how much percentage of our accumulated premiums must we have on hand, basically what it amounts to.
So I'm sending you an updated copy with
Oh,
some
good.
changes in red, and I'll talk about that.
And all the rest is this commentary that leads to us to be asked to adopt an actual policy consistent with DFR's interests.
So, I'll tell you the point of the policy, DFR's role, and why we want you to act by June 30th at the latest. So we hold, as a trust, we hold an amount of money, I wanna say we're probably in the range of 39 million right now, in reserve. So it's money that we have set aside to cover the unexpected, because at the end of the day, no matter what we think the medical claims will be, we have to pay every medical claim that actually comes through. And there's always surprises in our world, so we hold reserves. DFR has asked us several years ago, actually, Mark and Joe Zimmerman went out for this even before DFR became involved. Well, what's the right amount of money for us to hold, right? And so we've had 3 actuarial opinions now, starting in 2011. We have to file these with DFR. That says we want to hold in our reserves 15% of total expenses. That's our target, is 15%. DFR has accepted that as reasonable, and we've been above and below and at the target, and you'll see numbers to that point every year when we set rates, because that's when it matters. And when you look at the financial statements and you see that positive or negative, it's been negative lately, that means how much money we will take out of our reserves, right? Because when we end the year with a negative, we really have money, it just means we've lowered that reserve now because we've used that money. And if you saw a positive at the end of the year, we added to reserve. So you're kind of looking at it every month in those monthly financials, but did we hit the 15% target? We look at you in August, okay? So DFR started a conversation with us, and it's one that we've sort of had internally anyway. Well, you're never gonna hit exactly 15%, right? So what above and below 15% is sort of an acceptable discretion area, and where do you have to start acting because you may be too low or you may be too high, frankly. So DFR informally started talking to us, I think in 2016, about this concept, and formally put it on the record at the end of 17 when they completed their first official exam. And so in the memo to you, we talked about that language from the exam, that they want us to adopt a net position policy, and that they wanted it adopted by the end of 2018. We notified them that because of the change in board, we would not be meeting that deadline, and they did not complain about that. You know, they recommend you adopt the policy. Basically, when your regulator recommends something, you follow the recommendation, or else you may find that they become more engaged. So, and again, we think it's a good practice anyway. So we've been working on the policy, and we want it adopted by June 30th, because this past rating cycle, we asked DFR if we could use some of our reserves to lower modestly about $1.25 million of our reserves, to lower modestly the increases on the visitors population, even though it would drop us below the 15%. And they said, without a policy, without an actuarial opinion that says you can safely go below 15%, we're gonna hold you to 15%. And we don't want to be held exactly to 15% at this next rating cycle. We want to have some discretion, and so we want a policy in place, filed with DFR, that they have a chance, if they want to have a discussion about it, so that when the rate filing goes through, everybody kind of knows what the playing field is. So we've worked with an actuary. His opinion is attached. It will go to DFR as part of the policy.
Don't read it.
And we've put together a policy that Mark, Bobby Joe, and I, and Chris Roberts, who's the finance expert for VISBIT and VEHI, for you to consider. And I just want to go through the red changes that we didn't define IBNR, and of course, what the heck does that mean? So we defined it. It stands for incurred but not reported, but I wrote it out in real language. Claims that have been incurred but not reported. So we know as of today, there are all sorts of people who have gone to the doctor and picked up pharmacy that aren't yet in our system. The bills haven't come through yet. So we have to budget for that, and that's what IBNR stands for.
Before you go too far, are the red changes, are there changes from the first draft you sent us as compared to the one we looked at months ago?
Many changes,
Okay.
just started from scratch.
All right.
So the ones that this board looked at, I think back in August, before the board change, we've given a,
Forget that.
forget that.
All right.
Start from this policy.
Right.
Consider
Ignore
it
everything
forgotten.
but this.
Right. And the red is from when I submitted it in the packet.
Okay.
Okay, so IBNR needs to be defined.
Yep.
We had a numbering issue, starting with number, establishing and reserving should have been a new Roman numeral, not a definition, so we lost a Roman numeral, so we changed those. And then on the back side, we used the word plan, I think, a little too aggressively. It made it sound like there were two plans. The concept behind this policy is based on our actuarial opinion. We believe anywhere from 9.1% and above of target. So if we have in reserves more than 9% of our expenditures, we are sound. That doesn't mean we want to be down that low, but it's within your and our discretion in that that's our sandbox. If we get to 9%, you, the board, should expect us, management, to give you a plan that talks about how did we get this low? You know, what are the causes and what strategy should we use to rebuild as opposed to another, it sounded like maybe there was another plan. So strategy is the right word. How would we get back up? What do we recommend? And then if we get to 6% or less, DFR has a copy of this plan and we formally engage DFR. Now again, DFR follows us monthly. They look at our audits annually. They're not gonna be surprised. It's not like DFR knows nothing and then they find out we're at 6%. But what we're saying to DFR is, we can successfully manage the program up to the 9% of target. And if we get to 9%, we will take formal action on what we're going to do. And if we actually get to 6%, we will formally be filing with you for the record that plan of action. So it sets some boundaries. Now, we also recognize that, well, what about the other end of the spectrum? What's too much? Is 16% too much? Is 21% too much? We decided that that really is should be discretion of the board, that you should determine what's too much, and that if you determine it's more materially greater, and that should be your world, not ours, you can authorize, first you could just sit on it because you know, looking out, it's not gonna last. Or you may wanna sit on it because you wanna use it to invest in some loss control or other kinds of projects. Or you wanna wait till the next rate cycle to lower rates. But you do have some mid-year corrections and we just articulated what those were. So we're trying to put down sort of what the sandbox is for a policy that goes to DFR, knowing that you have a lot of discretion within the world. So that's the concept. And now, go ahead.
Since I was looking down when I came up with my question, I'll go first. I think I understand it, and it's sort of talked around here, but what happens, if I understand it right, the target net position is 15%, but the policy really isn't triggered until you get down to 9%. So my question is it clear? And if it is, I'm not capable. Or is there a gap in the policy as drafted as to what happens if the reserves fall below 15% but remain above 9%?
So if you look at definitions,
Yeah,
net position, which is the financial term for reserves,
yeah.
changes daily, if not weekly and monthly. So we've defined it. It's the end of the fiscal year. It's how you end the fiscal year. That's the number you're looking at. You're not chasing something.
And that's 15%.
Right. Same with total expenditures. It's how much you expended after the audit. The target is of net position is a target that will be a percent of total expenditures that we want to hold. So that's the general thing, right? Establishing that target is done by an independent actuary, and it's 15% now. And we are suggesting that you review it whenever you feel necessary, but at least every 5 years. So that there's some discretion there. If it falls below the target and meets one of the action levels, we have to take action.
That's my question.
So that's what it says in the new number 4, at the bottom of page 1. If it falls below the target and meets one of the action levels, we have to take action. So the idea is, in between that space, there is no action required.
Okay, so the answer is nothing. There's no reason to specify anything between 9 and 15.
No, because
Got it. I
it
understand.
leaves it at your
I got
discretion.
it now. Well, thank you, that's
It's-
very helpful. Good.
And just
Robert.
so we're clear, and again, from the banker, and I deal with balance sheets, although this is a little bit more of a bizarre version, but I hope we all understand what we're talking about here for a nonprofit. You're certainly familiar with this, but you don't wanna have too much money built up. Joel isn't running a hedge fund here, right?
We had that problem.
Right, where you don't
7
want
years ago.
money, because then, and I think Fran alluded to with respect to prescriptions, then our members are either paying too high a premium or whatever. I
Correct.
get that. On the other hand, I would say, and I'm glad you raised the issue between 9 and 15 makes me a little nervous because we're dealing with an aging cohort. And I guess my question for the staff is, if between 9 and 15, we decide it's getting a little low and we want it to be changed, that implies premium increases. Am I right?
So first of all, our population's not getting older, we're actually remarkably stable in population, we do look at it every year, we're heavy female.
I know, I haven't
At a
aged in
certain
10
age.
years.
You don't look any older.
Okay, because people retire, right? So when you look at who we serve, our average
Right.
age has actually been stable
Okay.
and remains stable. Doesn't mean we don't follow it.
Right.
Secondly, so most of the reserve is going to change 5 to 8 million just because the world we live in, we're trying to predict $240 million worth of claims about 2 years ahead. So our reserve could go up or down, you know, 3, 5, even $6 million just because of the normal uncertainty and not be a surprise. You may have to add, we have, I think, only once intentionally had premiums higher than we expected they needed to be. We never know what they need to be. What we expected they needed to be, and that was the very last 6 months of the old health
But my
plans.
question was different. My question was, if for whatever reason we decide that the percentage is low and has to be bumped up, are we dealing with turning an aircraft carrier here? Like, how much time does it take
Good question.
to bring this up?
That's why we put a boundary of 9%, because we have managed the up and downs successfully, you can see on the spreadsheet, for our entire history, and we went to the actuary. You know, the whole point is you want to be able to make small adjustments instead of huge
Right,
spikes.
that's your
So that we could do,
Yes,
and that in a reasonable period of time,
Yes.
that's all I'm
yeah,
saying.
we could,
Yes.
yes.
3 more minutes on this, and then we get into the big one. Peggy?
I was interested in the high end. Have you got averages, or where have we been over the past?
Well, you've got it,
I got this one,
Right,
gotcha.
the spreadsheet, you can see the percent started at 3 when we first had data in 2001.
Yeah.
We were as high as 34%.
34%.
And that was unintended, frankly. And it wasn't due to intentional loading of the rates. It was due to Blue Cross, year after year after year, overestimating what the claims would be. And they've improved their processes, and now we have some years they're over, some years they're under, which is actually what an actuarial analysis usually turns out to be. We were in a different environment at that time, so you can see the history of the rates.
So if that's taken into account then, that things have improved greatly, we should not expect to hit any of those numbers again.
I mean, our goal
That's the goal.
to manage, to the degree that you can manage, there's a lot of
Yeah.
predictability. But we will tell you, for example, at the next rate cycle, we ended the year and we're at 14.7%. We've already set rates for the next year. Our projections are we're gonna, at the end of that year, end here. And we are recommending rates to you that at the end of that year, will end there. And we're constantly looking to Blue Cross, you know, as we're watching our financials. Is there any reason for us to think we need to readjust our expectations mid-year? I mean, that's what we do. And, you know, nobody wants to have a 34% reserve, because we're taking money out of people's school budgets and pockets. But we also don't wanna be unsurprised unpleasantly. And we've got a whole structure in place that allows us to keep from unwanted spikes up or down.
Well, you just left that end open, so that's why I'm thinking ahead, how are we gonna come up with that number, whatever it is that we set at our limit?
So I don't think you put a number, our final decision was, you don't put a number in policy. If you look
Okay.
at the opposite of the 9%, it's 21%.
Right.
Okay, and at one point, we had 21% in policy. If 9% is the bottom, 21 by the same mathematics is the top. And then the feeling was that, that we shouldn't set a hard line, that the board should make that decision based on all the factors it has available. And that you could put in a number.
So essentially 15 is our number. If we go over, we'd be making our decisions about.
Yeah, I mean, we use the word materially. You know, materially in a program of our size is in the millions of dollars. So, if we were up to 17%, but knew that we were about to introduce new health plans with a lot of volatility, we might say we want to sit on it to get through that. If we knew there was new federal legislation pending, we might want to sit on it. If we felt like we're really stable, we're really predictable, and we're up this high, then we probably want to build it into our rates.
Nope, that makes sense, it was just the way you pitched it earlier.
Yeah, I
was
mean,
that we
it's
needed
a-
number, that was my understanding, sorry.
No, it's a good question.
I think the two places that the board could easily modify without sort of undermining the actuarial and financial logic that went behind this is to decide to set a number at which, if it's higher than some percent above 15, and I wouldn't do 16, I wouldn't do 17, I wouldn't do 18, you know, I'd give a couple percent, but if you wanna pick a number above that forces you at that number to have a conversation, I think that is a reasonable thing for the board to do. And I think the other place that you can put your judgment in, because it's just judgment as opposed to the financial actuarial underpinning, is how often do you wanna hire an actuary to relook at your 15%? We put in 5 years because frankly, if you do it too often, DFR is gonna think you're fishing for a number that you like, right? And if you always have the right to say, hey, the environment's changed, let's relook. If you go out more than 5 years, or too much more than 5 years, you might be missing something that you weren't aware of. So 5, but it could be 4, it could be 6. I think there's some discretion in there if you feel like, I think those are the two places that.
All right. Sufficient for today?
Can I just say that in the years after 2011, when it was lower, those were intentionally planned reductions in our net fiscal position. At that time, we thought we were transitioning ourselves to ceasing to exist for transition to a statewide single payer system. And that did not materialize.
We also had too much in reserves anyway.
No, well, at one
A
point,
little
but
earlier
that
than
dropped
that.
Prior
really
to that.
quickly.
Right.
I'm talking about when we were 11, when we were below the 15,
I'm
9,
a couple
8,
years older than
8%.
that. Okay.
So I just,
Any point well
mostly
taken.
for people who weren't on at the time, which is most of you now.
The staff has been, well, I don't know how long you've been working on this proposal or this document, but I know you've worked hard as well as long on it. And so for the next 80 minutes until a little after 4, we're going to be talking about, you have, I guess you have names.
Can I ask a
Yeah, the cost of quality
I
initiative.
thought people might want to stretch a little bit.
Is the bathrooms available yet?
You can use, I don't know, I'll find out, but you can use them, just don't flush them.
You just can't use them.
So don't use the one
Use
I-
the outhouse.
Can we take action on that now, or do we need to wait?
No, we're waiting. I
Okay,
mean, the
That's
plan was to wait until
let people think,
sometime later in the spring, early,
Right.
actually June.
alright.
Can't flush yet.
Okay.
You can deposit.
So I propose nothing, I just want you all to know, I grew up in Flushing, New York.
I'm sorry.
I have characterized the town where I grew up as the largest job in the world. So I will give $1 to anybody who comes up with the second Flushing, New York. Get it? The second largest job in the world would be something like that. think about it sometime. And when you're ready,
We're being recorded, I'm gonna
I think
stop.
the public can stand a little humor in this room, if I'm not mistaken.
Mark, further our discussion next meeting.
So we're on break until.
Okay,
Wait,
good.
there they are. I
One
knew I
second.
printed more, so I could write it.
First, thank you for the time. It's a really important issue, and this is really the beginning of a conversation, one that we hope will extend well into this year and beyond. It's been a process, a project that's been underway now for several months. And the management team has a sort of general idea in its own head of how to frame this discussion. We've suggested some questions for that purpose, but we also want to be clear that what's most important to us today is that we hear from you. And so, to the extent we don't get through all the questions, or there's more interesting questions, or more interesting diversions that you as a board wish to follow, we are more than happy to go off script and do so. That said, we thought it would not be in the best interest of time today to engage for any great length of time or to dissect or debate the report itself that we sent you. We're certainly happy to take questions about it and reference it. But because we want to focus most of our attention on the cost and quality initiative and what it means and why we're pursuing it, we'd like to sort of let the report speak for itself and again handle any questions that might come up in reference to it, but not allow it to dominate the discussion. The report mentions explicitly or alludes to structural and systemic issues in the healthcare system that every single insurance pool or carrier, large or small, public or private, and I should add to that, employer and employee, is grappling with at present. And every organization, our own included, is dealing with the question of the medical, financial, and social implications of very high and rising medical prices, the subpar quality of care, the pervasive problem of waste and overtreatment and potentially avoidable complications, the concentrations of cost among a relatively small percentage of the population on a consistent basis, and the costs that are associated with treating folks with chronic and complex conditions. And also, what really often amounts to the absurd variations in price and transparency and cost standards, both here in Vermont and nationally. I mean, Robert has already alluded to the lack of transparency around cost and quality, and that is certainly an issue that will concern us. So what's happening here in Vermont and what's happening nationally around all of these issues has sort of given birth to what is sort of loosely referred to as the value-based benefit design movement or value-based healthcare movement. And essentially, it's asking the question of how do you define and ensure access to high-value care? What does that mean? And how do you do it in a rational and sustainable way in respect to cost? How do you measure value? How do you incentivize it? How do you make a linkage between your definition of high-value care and benefit design? How do you educate patients or people and employers about value and their role in helping to encourage it and to protect it and sustain it? Long story short, and there's a lot more chapters to this, we'll spare you this today. Our discussion, our research, led us eventually to Prometheus Analytics and Alton. And because chiefly Prometheus at this point in time is on the cutting edge of analytics, payment reform, and a major player in this discussion of how you define and how you ensure you're getting access to value-based care and how you also ensure you've got real cost and quality transparency in practice. So Bobby, Joe, and I, and Laura, after a lot of time talking internally, invited Prometheus Analytics to Vermont. We spent a day with their representatives. I think it's fair to say it was a provocative and eye-opening day. And we eventually expanded this conversation to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. We arranged a virtual meeting between Prometheus and the Blues. We also met with other entities at the Blues' request who do work similar to Prometheus, But at the end of the day, the three of us felt strongly that in this first stage of this cost and quality initiative, we would be best served by Prometheus Analytics because of its reputation, its experience working with a number of different payers, large and small, and its very sort of unique approach to the question of value. And finally, what we're undertaking is really quite new for us, and I think it's fair to say it's probably really bold and innovative in respect to Vermont as well. And it has potentially very significant implications for future benefit plan design, for the structure of our medical networks, for how we evaluate and contract and reimburse providers, how we undertake educational projects, both with the provider community, but more importantly, with employees and school boards, and also our future relationship with Blue Cross and other entities. And for the first stage of this project, we are, as we noted in the report, partnering with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont. We are not only going to be analyzing the data that VEHI generates within its pool, but all of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont's book of business is going to be part of this analysis. 3 years worth of data is going to go through the Prometheus analytical mill.
Prior years, I assume.
Yes, prior years, correct. And Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, at our invitation, agreed to take part and will be sharing the lion's share of the cost for this initiative. So with that said, what we'd like to do as a starting point is to turn to the 4 questions that we generated for you. You won't be able to miss them. I'll just show a piece of paper. And also, this is something of a break for us in terms of process, but we thought it'd be helpful, is that we'd like to tackle the first 2 questions in a small group setting, not as a board as a whole. That we'd ask representatives of Vermont MEA and representatives of VSBA and pairs to get together. Oh, yes, of course. And we'd ask a representative of VSBA and a representative of Vermont MEA pairs to get together, start talking about questions 1 and 2. We'll give you about 20 minutes for that conversation. We ask that one of you agree to be a note keeper and report back to the group at the close of 20 minutes. And then we'll pick up the conversation from there when we're all back together. Bobby, Joe, and Laura, anything you want to add?
I have a question.
Please, Mark.
Why are we gonna break up when it's a board discussion, there's only 5 of us?
Well, it just seemed that it might be a productive and different way of just having a conversation. And just give also folks an opportunity to just work as individuals.
Well, I think we can do that, sitting at the table, because then we're gonna have to come back and then reiterate exactly what we just did amongst the 2 of us, right? That's my thought, that's my opinion.
I mean, let's, you know, again, this is your discussion, so if people are more comfortable in a group setting, having the conversation, that's fine too.
I think we're okay.
Any other comments about process around that?
I have some big historical context questions and perhaps comments.
Okay. Would it be helpful to you to engage those first before we have a conversation?
I think so, if I may. And my first question is, you referred to this as the project. Can you explain again what the project is? I want to draw a connection back to what I recall from my prior board service about what we've discussed in the past and what my expectations were. And make sure there's board consensus on what the project and the
Sure.
authorized direction of the work
Sure.
is.
Well, let me turn your attention to page 1 of the report. I think that's a good place to begin answering that question. Of course. Anyone else need a copy of the report?
Oh, yeah.
I printed 3, but I have another one and I can go print more.
So, everything in healthcare, as those of us who work in it from day to day understand, everything begins with good data. So we, at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont, are going to partner with Prometheus Analytics. Again, there's a lot of information about Prometheus in the report, to do an analysis of 3 years worth of claims data. And the goal of this initiative, or this analysis, is to help us target and reduce systemic drivers of excessive healthcare costs. And that includes high prices, unjustifiable price variations, potentially avoidable services, and potentially avoidable complications. Prometheus believes that the kind of analysis that we'll be doing for us, both with our data and the Blues Book of Business, will help us to begin to identify where in our world we are seeing unjustifiably high prices or unjustifiably sort of inexplicable price variations, where we're generating complications that are perhaps avoidable, and by virtue of being avoidable, thus in the future we can save costs, and where perhaps there's overtreatment and waste. Also, it's our hope that in the long term, based on this particular analysis, we can begin to get a better understanding of cost and quality. We pay a large sum of money every year, and we have a very poor sense of what episodes of care cost and whether we are actually getting the kind of quality outcomes based on best medical practices. This analysis, I think, will drive us much further down the road toward making cost and quality transparency a very realizable and actionable objective.
So what's the timeline for the data analysis?
The data analysis will begin about within a month, is that fair, or sooner?
Yeah, I think it goes next week, the data goes next
The
week.
data goes next week. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont and Prometheus are already working on a contract with each other. In fact, we've seen a copy of it. Assuming there's no glitches with the contractual discussions, and we don't see any reason why there would be based on what we've read. Once that data is delivered, Prometheus is going to dig right into it. I think they told us they believe it can be done within a month's time. Again, analysis of 3 years worth of data, and we will have a report back from Prometheus Analytics sometime in late April.
Okay.
And we are then setting up meetings with Prometheus Analytics and Blue Cross for, I want to say, is it late April, early May?
Yes.
Okay. The other advantage to this analysis is that if it shows us that we have centers of excellence, whether they're named that or not, or we have particular provider networks or provider institutions where really high quality care is being delivered, and we're not seeing a high rate of potentially avoidable complications or unnecessary services, we have the opportunity in the future to think about designing or redesigning our networks to actually encourage people to get care at those particular centers or in those provider practices. Because to the extent you get the right care at the right time, and you can avoid those complications and unnecessary services, you not only keep people healthy, obviously, and avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering, you also lower costs for the trust, lower costs for school districts and employees. And then also, the potential implications of all of this beyond networks is that it opens the door to reconceptualizing how we actually pay providers. Moving away, for example, from a fee-for-service system, which is essentially what we have today, where you pay for virtually every pill and procedure, toward, for example, bundled payments or episodic care contracting. Now, that's nothing we've agreed to do yet, but that's an implication or potential of this project.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good segue into my preliminary thoughts about this as a whole. And I wrote a lot of notes, so I didn't forget everything that I wanted to say. I want to say that I think it's very important for this board to, and our administrative team to take the time to reflect on what we do and what we offer and the data in relation to that. I want to emphasize, however, that for some time now, members of this board and members of the public now have asked that we spend some time as a board looking deeply at our mission and who we are as an organization and what our work plan is. And we haven't done that yet, and I think that that is an important precursor to any sort of intensive project that this board might undertake around reconfiguring, redesigning, or otherwise significantly changing the mission, vision, or goals or work of this organization. It's very important, I believe, to make sure that we have a clear agreed upon mission and a work plan, and we simply don't have that yet. And before new board members in particular can navigate nuances around how to change it or improve it, we've got to have a common understanding of what that is. And of course, both together, data and a knowledge of who we are, how we operate, and what the work is we have to do, is better informed by data. The board of the past was informed of a commitment or an interest in improving the availability of data to help this body do that work. But I don't think the board of the past has authorized a project per se to redesign the continuum of health plans that we offer, other than tweaks like we just discussed earlier around improving things like how we structure benefits. In fact, I think the board of the past made the decision that we needed to be committed to sustaining the plans we have long enough to get data about their efficacy, the cost, the quality, and the impact on care, and recognize that that was going to take several years. So that's my recollection of the direction that the board of the past has given. I find the proposal itself, the report itself, something more like marketing materials that
Tracy, could I interrupt for a second?
takes us beyond, sure.
Thank you. The staff prepared a presentation with several questions attached to it. It seems to me that some of what you're saying, while all of it is likely very important, it could lend itself to less of a immediate presentation and more of a board discussion. So with your permission, I'd appreciate it if you would just enable the staff to pursue its plan here.
I'm answering question number 1.
So I take it is it the will of the board that you would prefer to have this conversation at the table as a whole rather than breaking up into groups as we proposed? That process question didn't actually get resolved. Just to be clear, Phil, are folks okay staying at the table?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that said, that cleared up, then we can begin to address questions 1 and 2 as a group. And just to be clear, what we're talking about here is an analytical project, an analysis of data. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about redesigning the universe. We're saying let's dive into our data, see what it shows us on cost and quality, see where we're perhaps spending more than we need to be spending, see where it is our provider networks are functioning really well at a high level and where they're not, and then see what the implications of that might be for, as I said, our provider networks, our education networks, our benefit design. That's for a much more detailed, down the road conversation. But the project, stage 1, is the analysis.
So, as I said before, I don't object to data. We've talked about it before. I think that's an important thing. I object to the content of the report and the characterizations of what the board has expressed an interest in doing. And I object to the content of the report to the extent that it makes assertions about what we can do, what VEHI's mission is to do, and what we can do with regard to healthcare in Vermont and in the world. As I said, it seems more like a marketing piece rather than the report itself, not data, but the report itself seems much more like a marketing piece and not a thoughtful analysis of data from multiple sources representing multiple perspectives. And again, I think even if we decided that we wanted to assert a particular view about about wanting to engage in the world of healthcare and in the world and in Vermont differently, that it is very premature to do that, not having had thorough board discussions about what our mission is, what the work we have to do on an annual basis is, and how and when we should use new data that is going to be available in order to inform that work.
Other comments in response to question 1 or 2?
And I would say, on page 5, the data you have about VEHI, I think that is valuable for us. But I think what Tracy's point, I wouldn't think we'd object is if we have to do a triage, your pardon the expression.
If it's,
With this, thank you. An agreement on mission, given the new composition of the board, and make sure that the annual plan that is in place or has to be changed and that we're on it. And clearly, as a general statement, we would always be looking for opportunities to offer better services at lower costs, which would translate into either lower premiums or whatever, clearly. And it is possible that, or likely, that more data would help us do that. So I guess my question, and should have read my mind without reading, is would devoting time to at least the data part of this detour us or take us away from accomplishing the essential elements of our annual plan? Because if the answer is yes, that would, you said, I mean, be a concern. If this is something that's going to happen in parallel and will result in data, which we can talk about, that would be different. But if it's going to come at the expense of things that are on this work plan that we must do or should be doing.
so let me ask you folks, is this going to be done at the expense of other items on the work plan?
I didn't see it that way.
You know, I confess to not being terribly, what?
Have we even come up with our work plan yet?
Like I said, I'm not sure we finalized
That's the
it, but
thing.
That's what I mean. I tend to agree, because I was about to say, I confess to not being terribly familiar with the details of our work plan. It does seem, but it does seem to me that it is obviously consistent with the mission of VEHI to continue always to look for innovative ways to make sure that the school districts, the taxpayers, and the subscribers, the patients, the employees, have health care benefits that are as good as they can be and as affordable as they can be. And so, Tracy, I guess I'd ask you, in what ways do you see this as somehow inconsistent with the well-established mission of the organization?
Absolutely agree with that being the mission of the organization. I think it is important that the board, before it dives deeply into the data, does the basic work that a newly appointed board does, which is things like reviewing the mission of the organization, reviewing the work plan of the organization, understanding deeply the regulatory context and the organizational construct that we're operating in. And that's foundational to being able to contemplate any other systemic or significant changes. Take some look at the history as well. As I said earlier, we did have commitments to stay with the current plan structure. And again, what I read in the report, which we know, you said you didn't want to spend a lot of time on, is a vision for an entirely different sort of health plan structure and it even suggests that perhaps the board has somehow authorized this sort of thinking, and that's not the case.
Peggy?
Based on the agenda that we had and reading of the report, I really looked forward to this part of today, so I'm hoping we do get to have a bit of a conversation with it. Some of the things that I was, well, first of all, I guess, I don't see this as heavy data. I see this as some background knowledge, prepping us for the data that will come after the analysis. So I don't see this as digging into the data really heavily here with what I read. But in terms of the questions, I want to answer them. I've been ready. I'm ready to go. So what am I excited about? I'm excited about the fact that we're going to have some hard data to work with, and we're going to get to see that and to work with it. I'm also excited by one of the points that discussed the roles that the school boards and the association and VEHI in general will take in shaping plans, that potential is there. So those are two of the things that really excited me about this. What intrigues me is the idea of more transparency. I just am very excited about that, and about our connection with Blue Cross Blue Shield. I know that they're tightly interconnected, but I'm interested in hearing more about that and how it plays out. Probably my biggest concern as I read through this, and again, I saw this as building knowledge as we go forward, is the idea about the changes that would come from like a fee for service model. And we alluded to it earlier in what people are really ready to handle at Vermont at this point in time based on all the changes we've had. So that was my big concern as I started going forward. It came up, I truly am interested in hearing what other people's general takes are from this report and to just get to know each other a little bit in that way.
As I've, just a second, as I've considered this, let me try to put a couple things together. I don't think there's any problem with this board revisiting the mission and certainly looking over the work plan, and to the extent the work plan needs any adjustments in order to accommodate a worthy project that these folks have been doing, I think with all transparency for however long they've been doing it, can be accomplished within the framework of what Tracy's concerns are. My assumption is that this is years. This is a years-long endeavor. Nothing happening overnight.
Yeah, there's no overnight.
Nothing happening in the absence of the data that we're going to obtain and analyze. So anyhow, those are my feelings. To the extent that I can regain any excitement about healthcare reform, I'm excited about this.
Well, no, let, would, but then
Okay.
I wanted to put in
You
a
wanted to
little bit of
clarify something,
context
yeah.
at some
Okay.
point.
I just want to clarify something because Tracy made a good point. So our members are under a new regime, if you will, a new plan. So this data is going to be starting from when? Because otherwise it could be obsolete before we.
2 years of the old and 1 year of the new.
So 2016, 17, 18.
So I guess that it ties in a little bit to what Joel was alluding to. So will that be useful to us, like, as the goalposts have moved?
Because of the way that we're, can I answer?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
If we were looking at data around, did we change people's behavior due to utilization, the 2 years in the old plan wouldn't be useful, and the 1 year in the new plan wouldn't be valid because of the year. However, what we're looking for in this data, and we have to see the data to know what we find, is can we see areas in Vermont that have higher rates of complications than should be expected, and therefore the quality consistently over time, and I'm just gonna make stuff up, and I'm gonna use, we're on camera, so I'm gonna make up fictitious places. You know, let's say hospital A consistently has high infections on knee surgery, but the other hospitals in the state don't. Maybe we don't find that, but that would be a concern. The other thing we're gonna look for is there any evidence of one hospital or one provider practice doing an unnecessary number of services. So every time you go there, you get a C-section, or a high percentage of deliveries are C-section, or a high percentage of people who go for lower back pain always get an MRI. So the kinds of things we're looking at in this particular data set isn't impacted by the plans and the utilization of the subscribers. So that, otherwise you would be absolutely right, it would be the wrong time to look at data on utilization.
Thank you.
Just saying, no, just quickly to say, if it's going to be a data process and we're not prejudging the outcome, I mean, something like signing an agreement with the hospital, large corporations are doing that now, Boeing,
Yes.
Disney,
Yes.
Walmart even. Walmart is now requiring its employees for certain surgeries to go to particular places. So that's not
correct.
terribly
No, it's not right.
out there. But if we don't prejudge what is done with the data, and you're saying you want better data on what's working and what is not that we ultimately pay for, my only question, not even concern, is will it come at the expense of this essential work plan? But I understand it supports the work plan. But
It could. Again, I feel like the report itself posits a direction that we have not agreed was a direction.
But we don't
Other
have
than-
to. We don't
Other
have to.
than, we have long asked for more data to inform decision-making on a number of things.
Maybe on Dan's, Tracy, can you point to just an example of where the report itself points in a direction rather than cites
I
aspects
think
of
the
a
choice of
large
the,
problem?
yeah, the choice of the data and the sources that we're citing is not necessarily balanced. And
Trace, let's,
What do you mean?
by data, you mean like there'll be
the
search.
yes,
Where should I be looking?
Page, starting on page 3 where there's a citation of information.
Ah, yes.
yep.
Is there a particular source you
I'm
think
still,
we
I'm
should have
still,
cited?
yeah.
Page, just, well,
Tracy, while you're looking, I'm gonna yield to Robert here.
Yeah.
I'll come back to you.
again, and I think the data on our expense is wonderful. To say we spend 10,000 per capita and our health outcomes are lower, well, first of all, but we're wealthier. You wouldn't regard it as a public policy success if per capita health expenditures were reduced to the level of Chad or Guinea-Bissau, for example, right? We spend more arguably because we have. And what the OECD, that's the Organization on Economic Cooperation and Development, says is, don't look at, there's actually been a convergence. The United States is not terribly out of line in terms of per capita expenditures if you use what's called purchasing power parity. You have to equalize for purchasing power. So I think to Tracy's point, people who want to say the current system with private insurance has to go tend to use that data. And all I'm saying is I'm supportive of a data collection process if we're not prejudging what the future promised land will look like.
I mean, it may be
I'm
helpful.
not saying you are,
No,
but there are
thank you.
folks who do.
It may be helpful to know that when we met with Prometheus, they were very explicit on the essential nature of the analysis, that you should make no decisions there. You shouldn't be thinking about the direction of the future until you know where you are right now. And that point was one they made repeatedly in their conversations with us, which of course leads immediately to this analysis.
So the report says where we are now is not acceptable. It cites national data and it says we need to change it.
What the report says is this is where we are now, that we should continue to see healthcare costs rising, and according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, to roughly 20% of GDP within the next 7 to 8 years. That's CMS, not necessarily a radical organization, right? And what you have here is data from very reputable sources about cost trend, about utilization, about quality. You know, ironically, today I opened up the Times Argus and the editorial was about high spending on healthcare in the US and subpar quality. These debates that are going on right now around the country are literally everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. You don't have to actually dig too deep to find it. This is not a document that presupposes an outcome. It's a document that says, given these facts, given these trends, how can we as VEHI address the cost and quality issues that we're facing? And we believe one way to begin that conversation is by doing this analysis.
I agree data is important. I believe also with that, and it's referenced briefly in the piece, that the newly reconfigured board needs to deeply take this opportune time to reassess its vision and goals. Before we can reassess, we need to understand what they are, right? Be sure everybody understands the regulatory context that we work in and the work that we need to do. And, you know, I agree with that as well. I'm not comfortable with the framing that VEHI has been reacting and needs to change its position to better look to the future. I feel like we've been a very thoughtful, responsive, proactive organization in the context of a complex regulatory environment, and want to reiterate clearly that we are an intermunicipal insurance pool that is responsible for providing the health insurance for our subscribers. And we need to spend time as a board understanding that role and that mission before presenting data that posits or is the foundation to advocacy. Again, I feel like it's marketing and data for a significantly different role for this organization.
Can I, you've used the term marketing about 5 times here. If I understand this report, these folks created it for the 6 of us. says, anyway, the
That's
legs
with
of
the board.
it says
Yeah.
submitted to the board.
It's a public document though,
So,
right?
I mean, I don't know that there's a flaw, even if using the rhetoric that you're using, what is the flaw in these three people marketing their notion of how to proceed to us? That's, when you use marketing, it implies to me that you're thinking of something larger than the people in this room,
I do.
right? And I don't perceive the purpose of this document to be that. It's marketing to the board, an approach to its mission. That's my take on it. Fran, and then Barbara.
Yeah, I guess, I was gonna say too, I guess I see it as the staff offering us a vision that we need to be considering. It seems to connect to the mission statement, and to what I understand, we need to be doing as the VEHI board. We're not, the initial collecting information that becomes, was data that gets analyzed, the analysis, this really doesn't say anything about what we then end up doing once we see the analysis, because that would be presupposing something. We need to see the analysis, and in the time that it comes back, the analysis comes back, or when we're gonna start looking at, we could and should look at the work plan and whatever else, but I don't see where this is out of line with whatever we are doing or should be doing. So I guess when I hear marketing, I hear a negative connotation, and that makes me kind of
I teach
get,
marketing.
I'm sorry,
Well, now you know where you stand.
I wrote about advertising and marketing for years.
And now you know where she stands.
Cringing. Whereas I just think, I think it's a refreshing vision of something more active and something that can carry us, move us forward on what we're supposed to be doing, rather than sort of keeping us stagnant.
Robert,
Well,
Laura.
quick, I mean, what is strategic management? You're here and you wanna go here. So you've gotta know where you are first. So to reiterate something I said earlier, I would support data collection that will help us have a clearer sense of where we are. So for example, when you said between 10 and 30% of all healthcare spending goes towards treatments, drugs, cancer surgeries patients don't need, but that's from the lone incident in Boston, that's not about our base, right? That's, because you say we overspend, and I hate pronouns. So I'd say, again, to reiterate, I do think we have to have at some point, and we keep on a clarification of the mission, a clarification of the annual plan. If you're saying that this is not coming to the detriment of what we have to do, I think it would be valuable to get greater insight on Vermont VEHI-based data on where we stand. But where that goes, we'll have to see. I mean, there's many, whether it's outside of our mission or frankly outside our resources. I mean, the things that a Boeing or a Disney can do in terms of negotiating hospitals versus what we can do when we as you. So I don't even know. But if you're saying we're going to get a deep dive into data, so what's going on here, that I would support, subject to, again, I hate to perseverate, clarifying the board plan and the mission. So I partially agree with you. Where the vision is, meaning the end point, I don't know yet. I don't think we're in a position.
I am going to let Laura talk, and then she's going to let me talk.
All right, so a couple things. We did give you US data, Vermont data, and VEHI data. One of the things, or sort of research, when we have looked, we are not out of line with the state, which is not out of line with national. That doesn't mean that there aren't specifics to us. One of the reasons that we really pushed Blue Cross to do their whole book of business as well as VEHI, there's a couple reasons. First of all, we may not have enough of a particular service at a particular place to be reliable and valid, but as a state we will. Secondly, when we look at ourselves and we look at Blue Cross, are there differences, or can we feel confident that looking at Blue Cross as a whole is the same as looking at VEHI or not? So to try to parse out those things. And we may find that while we generally are the same as the state and the nation, we may have some unique differences that point us in a direction. It was helpful to me when we had Altarum come and speak to us, when they talked about 3 types of risk that health plans have, and that only one of which they pay attention to, because it resonated with me. So the one that we pay attention to is actuarial risk. It's that we make sure that our premium rates are appropriately set with an actuary, and we focus on that and we do that appropriately. But what we don't look at yet is technical risk and choice risk. So technical risk is, do the providers know what they are doing? Are they up on the right research? Are they doing things because there's societal pressure? Mother wants antibiotics for their kids as opposed to a medical basis for that. Are they doing it because they can bill for it and get paid? You know, are we making sure that our providers we're paying for the right technical services? And the other is choice risk, and that's sort of plan design. It's the risk, well, it's not plan design only, it's the subscribers. It's the risk that subscribers are asking for antibiotics when it's not necessary, that they want the MRI that they don't need, that they are going someplace that's not giving them the best care but they're not aware of it because they don't have the information. It's also the ability to influence subscribers not only through education but through plan design that incentivizes generic drugs, for example, like we've done. So what this data will allow us to do is first see, is there anything that stands out in the data that's actionable? And then where is it actionable? Can we influence providers in partnership with Blue Cross on how we pay them, how we set up our networks, you're in or you're out, or you're tiered in some way, through education of providers? Is there a technical risk avenue for us to pursue? And then is there a choice risk? Do we change plan designs? Do we do education of the members? So it'll give us the ability to see whether there's work for us in that area. Now, even if we identify that there is, and that's what we've tried to sort of outline on the other side, is it our role to do it? Do we have the capacity to do it? Is it consistent? Will it disrupt the environment? Can we get there? Who else do we need to be partners, right? Those are all the questions that we need to answer with you that should get woven into the discussion of what is your work plan, what is your mission, do we go forward? And the only step we're taking is to get some initial data to see if it shows us that there's opportunities, and then even if there are, we may not be the right organization to pursue. To be clear,
I wanted to just point to, sort of feel sort of defensive about a document that I have no role in creating other than I read it. And I thought it was complete and helpful. In terms of learning where we have been, the staff did not ignore that. If you look at the appendix, or addendum 2, there's a 3-page history of what has brought us to this point. And with respect to sort of being presumptuous about the work plan and the mission of VEHI, I think I just don't find it. I find that in the summary statement on page 8 of the continuing the conversation, the first thing we're supposed to do is to blend this initiative into our mission and by definition, our work plan as well. So, you know, I understand some of the criticisms, and I understand some of them are, I won't say ideological, but because it's not ideological, but predispositions about whether to engage in this sort of, I will say forward-looking, or at least different-looking approach to how we go about the process of helping keep the cost of overall healthcare within our little ambit manageable without at all quality, and while at the same time increasing, frankly, the quality of those services. I'm having real trouble seeing anything inconsistent other than the predisposition with which each of us, as we read this, might start.
So I would say a suggestion that we haven't been doing that, at least for the last 6 years.
What's that?
Being forward-looking
And that's,
about how we accomplish the mission of VEHI
Right.
is troubling to me.
Well,
That said, I do agree fully with a commitment to being forward-looking about how we deliver on the mission of VEHI, and reiterate again that data to better inform that forward-looking approach is something that we've been asking for, and I haven't heard anybody around the table say they don't agree with that. I disagree with the characterizations of the work of the past that have been made in the room today and that were made in the report. I disagree with any ideological assumptions that are direct or implied, having been made by me or in the report, and think it's inappropriate for us to tread into that as the basis for future thinking. I want to take an opportunity to remind trust administrators and president, that for well over a year and a half, we've identified employee education as an area where we are not satisfied. Right down to the basics of what the plan options are, how plans work, how people can navigate and understand what co-insurance, co-pay, premiums and deductibles mean, and how folks can navigate things like options for understanding prices for prescriptions, because there are, although it's not always easy and it's not super transparent, there are tools we can be using. And we identified that as being something that was not meeting board expectations a while ago, and asked for a process to identify options for better doing that, including potentially going out for an RFP. And that in and of is identified as something that we ought to be doing better in here. Why aren't we getting that low fruit now?
I have no response myself. Does
Yeah,
anybody?
and of course you can't, and I don't mean to be so, I'm sorry, I wanna take good care of people too. And, there's work that we've identified that needs to be a priority, to make sure that we're doing it.
Robert?
Just briefly, so the data part, let us just say, we said, look, we don't know what our response would be to this data. We have, okay, and by the time you say it will take several years. So by that time,
I'm in a large project, I didn't mean data collection.
well, the data collection will take a while, because I thought,
No, actually, it won't. We'll have the data back at the end of April,
Oh,
or May at the
okay.
latest.
So
and
then,
then what will we, yeah, so I guess what will we be, are we, at that point, do we say, okay, say there's something that's on fire, or something that's an outlier. What then? We will be looking at, within the context of our mission, within the context of whatever regulatory constraints we have, within the context of what other organizations, public sector, private sector are doing, we would be asked to do what?
Well, I think, I can't answer the question yet. I think the data is gonna point us in particular directions, that's my hope. And I think it would be incumbent on this board to structure conversation, strategy sessions around what have we learned from the data? What does it suggest about the major areas that Laura pointed to on the other side of this yellow document? What does it suggest of anything about our mission, about our health benefit program, about our networks, our education initiatives? To what extent can it and should it inform the work that we're going to be doing both now and in the future? But that's a conversation that we can't just have as a management team. That has got to be an organizational conversation. And in fact, there may very well be a role for school boards and local unions and school employees in that as well, right? So, but what we're just trying to do is get out the gate, right, and lay this foundation that would allow this conversation to go forward.
Fran, I'm sorry.
Question, I don't see why two things can't be happening at the same time, simultaneously, and that is the data piece, the report. Is there anything big, on the agenda for our meeting on the 29th? Is there, like, this meeting was set aside primarily for hearing this report. What's the 29th?
Well, we gave drafted, Mark, Bobby, Joe and I gave draft agendas for April, May, and June to Joel and Robert, and they're all an entire page long, and that assumes you get things done today, so.
Anyhow, what were you gonna suggest?
Oh, because what I was gonna suggest is that that on the 29th, if we then start the sort of parallel conversation about reviewing the mission and our work plan.
I think that's key. We need to start looking at the work plan so that if we do decide to move forward with this data, that in our work plan it says, okay, in May, we will review the data that we've received, but we don't have that work plan yet. So to me, this whole thing, it kind of was like a precursor of what the data may tell us. It was kind of, to me when I read it, it was kind of like, well, the data is gonna say this, so this is the way we need to move. That's what I took from this plan, and I apologize if that wasn't the intent. That's how I read it.
Where do you see that in the report?
It's just in the, it's not a specific, it's just in all of the recommendations, like, what are your questions about upcoming cost and quality initiatives? I mean, I don't know, I gotta see what the data is gonna tell me before I can even start thinking about answering some of these questions,
Okay, that's an answer, fair enough.
so.
I mean, Peggy. Fran, would you ask
You wanna
Peggy
tell
to
Peggy
speak?
she can talk?
Thanks, Fran.
I'm sorry.
Part of me can't believe I'm gonna say this, but on the other hand, I get frustrated by the fact that we keep getting bogged down in the same things. So do we need a day where we just work on our vision, mission, and work plan? It means we're all gonna have to give something up to make that full day happen. I'm talking a full day. Put us in the room, don't let us out until we figure it out. Something to that effect, because I really thought we were gonna have a full discussion here today, and we can't get there because there are these other pieces. Tracy's alluded to the fact that we need board education. I do, absolutely, I 100% agree with you. So, do we look at the calendars again and figure out when we can have a day that we're all in the same room? And I really mean 8 to 5, whatever it takes, so that we can start moving forward with some of this work. I'm ready, I think everybody at the table is. Let's make it happen.
You're
Isn't
right.
the first item here?
A public service announcement, the water's back on. Okay.
I believe something.
The first thing on the back, if this was your sort of rollout for how we would address all this, am I right?
Yeah.
First thing is VEHI's mission.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, if we need it, but maybe we can build it into a future meeting, because frankly, you have it there as, here's how we're going to be addressing this.
I'd like to think that, but I think there's far more to it, is my gut, based on some of the things, comments that Tracy has made, from open meeting policy to, there's a lot that,
Yeah,
you know, a full day training for all the new board members I would recommend in the future would be a real plus. We haven't had that. We tried to start things in October, we never met until almost Christmas time. This has been incredibly drawn out. So I'm just saying that for me personally, I'm ready to call a timeout. Let's get this work done, whatever it takes, so that we can go forward. Because we are treading water and it's wonderfully frustrating.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Thank you. That's perfectly appropriate comments by all of you who have pointed this out. Robin.
But I think there's agreement, not to disagree, that this exercise could be very valuable to give us information. It's just, there are concerns as to what we do with it, or what the future, the promised land looks like, whether we're capable of it, permitted to do it, but that's different. The basis of the project is to gather more data, and we might look at it and say, though it would be great if we could address this, that's not something we're able to do. It would be great if we could cure cancer, but we can't do that. So there might be things that are base hits, if I can use the baseball analog, that either we should be doing, should have been doing, can be doing, right? And I suspect what would come out of this is a continuum with some unambitious things that we could do versus some more ambitious things that will take a longer term conversation. And we might not agree on some of the more ambitious things. things, but certainly I hope we can go for the basics.
Thinking out loud here, there are a few sort of big discussions that are already sort of either planned or anticipated. But I couldn't agree more personally with the importance of all of us having some common baseline understanding of what we are, where we came from, and more nuts and bolts aspects of the work of this organization. So the question becomes, how do we accomplish all of that by the end of the spring? That's really all I have to suggest at the moment. We have an actual meeting scheduled on April 29th, a tentative meeting scheduled on March 6th, and an anticipated to be announced meeting either in early June or something. Certain decisions have to be made by the end of June, and we know we have one decision that has to be made at the end of April. The issues in my mind that really need to be addressed relate to our how we arrange for services, which is to say staffing of this organization. We usually put that in the shorthand of service agreements, but I think it's a larger discussion. The other sort of lingering issue is the conflict of interest notion and its attachment to our policies and such. I think the onus is on me to provide the board with the sort of the stuff that I've been preparing, if I understand where we've been, what expectations have been placed in me are. That's about it. Oh, no. There was something else in my mind. Anyhow, there's one or two other items. I have no objection, as you know, when I'm in town to long meetings. I don't know that I can speak for anybody else on that score here. You there in the back.
As someone who regularly supports boards that are coming together and navigating a lot of the issues, I do want to encourage, and I believe when Jeff Bannon and I left the board, our last meeting, we sort of shared some parting thoughts, and one of my parting thoughts was it's going to be really important up front to invest the time to build some common understanding and relationships, frankly, but also why are we coming to meetings? What is it this organization is here to do? So I want to strongly encourage you to consider having an outside facilitator. I am not volunteering for that, but I have access to people that have a lot of experience supporting boards and working through a lot of the issues that you're contending with. And I think in order to allow everyone to participate, it's useful to have somebody from the outside, and have staff participate as well.
All right. We veered way off this. Let's come back to scheduling things like that and resolve what we're gonna do as a consequence of being presented this report.
So we didn't, what we wanted today was, I think, what we just had, which is a conversation, share your concerns, share what excites you, share how you read the report, which might be different than we thought it was gonna be read. And I think that this has been helpful. We have data coming. We had a vision, I think, of a couple things that we would leave you with. One is we do think we need a retreat. The retreat we envision, meaning not in this building and with an outside facilitator for basically most of the day. We think that part of that retreat is to work on the big questions, what's your mission and big questions, relationships and all. And part of it is to look at what the data report shows from this initiative as a sort of not to decide what to do with it, but to make sure you understand it. So that's something that we think needs to happen. We also thought that when we bring you a budget, because we think that you have 3 meetings, we're looking at the amount of work that needs to be done by June 30th, adopt a budget, deal with service agreements, adopt some of these other contracts, so on, that you won't have time to do big questions in the next 3 meetings. But that we were thinking that we would put a placeholder in the budget of about $50,000 that we don't even know what you might use it for, and it would be your discretion to use, but there might be some follow-up around from this data. There might be some, investment that you would like to make, so we thought it might make sense to have some kind of placeholder in the budget. On the other hand, you can always amend your budget any time of the year to do something.
Can you reiterate the dates for the future meetings?
Yeah.
We only have one scheduled, it's April 29th, but as we looked at the annual plan, the work that needs to be accomplished by June 30th, we imagined the board needs at least 3 meetings, and we gave Robert and Joel draft agendas, which they haven't, it's now in their court to work on. What we think you might talk about in April, we envisioned May, which you don't have a meeting set. We envisioned June, because we envision that you're gonna need multiple conversations to decide about service agreements, which you have an action request from the biz report, and budget,
Just basic work plan stuff,
just basic work plan stuff.
no vision stuff.
That's it.
Just-
No vision stuff.
I just didn't have any dates on my calendar and
We
I was
don't.
paying.
There's a reason
April
for that.
29th.
Okay.
April
Thank you. Well, I
29th
just
is
thought I
real.
missed it.
You have
I have
April
April 29th.
That's all we all have.
So I think that unless you wanna make closing comments, we can wrap this up as a good starting point.
What I'd like to do after Robert speaks is to thank you guys for, I mean, whatever else anybody thinks about this is an enormous project. This document is not easy to construct. It reflects a lot of work, and somebody ought to acknowledge that. I think we all do acknowledge that. Then there are 3 items that we need to talk about. We're scheduled at 4:30, is everybody aware of that, not 4 o'clock?
Yes, because I have a hard stop at 4:30.
Right, no,
Yeah,
I just wanna make sure we have that much time. 8D and E and item 11, I think, must be done. And there are a couple of others that might be done. Robert?
Well, I just, so quickly about the report, and again, I want to thank you for all your work. One thing that may come out, and since you mentioned the data, the United States has relatively high rates compared to other countries, things like diabetes, car accidents, smoking rates. So in other words, there's lifestyle choices, and that speaks to what Laura said this company defined as choice risk. So it could be subscribers, I'm not trying to stigmatize people who have a condition, but some people make lifestyle choices that impact the system as well, and I hope that the data,
Yeah, I volunteered for this, for example.
that the data will help us move in a direction, if we move in the direction of a system that also allows, that has a degree of individual responsibility. And I think that's very important, as opposed to just looking at how we can reduce the burden, regardless of what choices are being made. Also, Laura had sent to Joel and I the work plan in the light of our conversation. Do I take it, I printed it in color, Dean hates me, by the way, I'm burning through a budget, but the red means most urgent. Is that-
No,
No,
No?
that's in your lexicon.
the red means,
I
I
had
think
done
the
this
way
thing.
that I did it was
No,
the
I think
red
the printer, that's-
means that I had that's your work, you have to figure that out.
Okay, so
It's important for us, not for her.
is it necessary for you to resend this to say, look, here are the things that must be done in the next 3 meetings?
That was our attempt already.
That is evident from this,
All right,
all right?
let's move.
And I can speak to D,
I'm gonna
ABC in
speak
30
to,
seconds.
I'm gonna speak to D and E.
No, ABC.
But I wanna make sure we do D and C.
I could have already spoken to them if you had just let me speak, so I'm gonna speak. We have 3 contracts, we're
You know.
gonna bring you a recommendation on at a future meeting. The only thing today was a heads up that this is work you're gonna need to do.
Thank you. Took longer to break in, but it didn't say your piece, I'm sorry. Okay, there are 2 items here. I think E is quite simple and flows, the answer flows from D. We have a letter from Bob Giroux, who's the current chair of this board, regarding a meeting, setting up a meeting to talk through the service agreement with Visbit. As you may have noticed, I feel very strongly that our service providers ought to be dealt with in roughly equivalent manner. I'm going to suggest that rather than respond to Bob with a, of course, we'll meet, what I'd rather do is have us communicate with Vermont and EA and Visbit and ask to meet, probably board chairs with Robert and me, outside of the hearing of any staff. The letter from Bob indicates that Laura will retreat from any involvement. I don't see Bobby Joe as being necessarily sucked into this. And for purposes of parallel treatment, I don't think Mark should be in the room either. So that's how I propose we respond to Bob and his request. There's a lot of work to do with these service agreements. And there's an obvious interest on the part of, on my part, and I hope on everybody's part, in providing roughly equivalent treatment to the people with whom we work. The service agreement with Visbit has this really wondrous history that Laura clued me in on in January when we met privately, and it explained everything about why the differences exist between the two service agreements. It's an 11-year agreement that we have with Visbit, and we're running out of the first 5-year period of it. And we've had just annualized agreements with Provided A, and I don't know where the right response is, but Bob's letter triggered this thought process in me. I frankly think it serves all of us well if we were to have the first ever, I think, sit-down involving Visbit, Vermont EA, and VEHI together in the same room, just to talk through the issues, or the issues is a little heavy-handed.
And your
Talk through the
suggestion
items that we should,
You do that on
should
behalf
be.
of the board?
Can I finish my
I'm
statement?
sorry.
Is that
Go
finish
go
your?
ahead.
Well, I didn't forget. I think the end of my sentence was going to be so that we can share items for discussion that necessarily come up when we have individual discussions with either of them. And it seems to me that we'd end up with a much more positive result that we could probably all support. Tracy, what was your question?
My question was your suggestion that you do that on behalf of the board?
Well, that Robert and I do it on behalf of the board, and that their chairs do it on behalf of their boards. I didn't have an easier way other than putting a more than two pizza group in the room at the same time.
I guess, what do you mean when you say that you believe that we ought to be treating the two service providers the same?
I didn't say that, I said equivalently
All right,
in
what do you
terms
mean
of,
by that?
our expectations of each probably should be the same. The money should certainly not be the same. The money should, however, reflect the cost of the services and not any other factors associated with the provision of services. I'm not quite sure where to go beyond that. It just feels to me as though we've never done that. We always probably should have. We never did because things were going swimmingly until 2011 or whatever it was that our future was placed in serious jeopardy.
I guess I'm not comfortable with that, especially as there's a request to delay the service agreement evaluations. I think that it's important that we, regardless of how we go forward in the future, it's important that we evaluate the services of the past, and I think that that's fundamental for any changes that we would make in service agreements into the future anyway. So I'm merging agenda items, and I apologize because merging is
So do I understand you correctly to be suggesting that we need to conduct the evaluations before we have any meetings with the parties to the agreements? Is that, I'm just trying to understand what you're
yeah.
getting at.
I feel that we need to have the evaluations, and I need more time to think about the best way to respond to action regarding service agreements. Yes.
I still don't understand the sequencing.
I think,
What's your sequence? To do the evaluations before meeting
I
with
think we have
the
to do the
parties?
evaluations no matter what. I have to think about, I haven't decided on a meeting process, but I said that particularly without evaluation, I'm not comfortable with the process that you suggested.
Robert?
I would just say, if I didn't have the evaluations, I'd be very uncomfortable because I lack the institutional or experience or memory to credibly say anything. If it's just a get-together for coffee, and that's fine, but if it's a substantive meeting, and I'm clueless as to what has been done well or not, I would really be handicapped, frankly, as would you, but you have the advantage of some institutional memory that I don't have, so I'm.
It's failing though.
Well, but you're faking it pretty well, but I'm just saying I can't even do that. And I think, in terms of sequencing, he had said here, a joint board meeting, and I realize that's a logistical nightmare, hence your offer that the two of us, I'm just saying if this is anything more than a social call to say, here's what, broadly associating with the face, if it's a substantive meeting, I feel really handicapped, absent some real information as how things have worked out.
A joint board meeting was posited before the board reconfiguration, and we tabled it because the Act 11 passed. But the goal, because I had gone on behalf of the VEHI board to meet with the VSBIT board, I felt like people were making assumptions about the work of one another's, about the respective organizations and the dispositions of people on the board. And I felt like it would be very positive and productive for the boards to meet together, have conversations about things like audits, and the selection of audits, and I thought that that would move the contract and the services between that VEHI secures from VSBIT forward positively. So that's the history of, I'm not fully sure why, entirely what motivated VSBIT's letter to us, but I know that that history precedes us, and actually that's something that we had discussed with them before we were reconstituted.
Let's assume life were simple, and it would be under those circumstances. And conducting this evaluation, I guess, could, generally speaking, precede discussions about the next service agreement. How we're gonna get together is beyond me. And certainly a tripartite meeting would make the most sense to any of us, I imagine. There wouldn't be objection to Vermont and EA learning a little bit more about VSBIT than it knows, and vice versa, as well as the mix here.
I don't know.
You don't know.
I would just say, it's as if you had a parent-teacher meeting and you didn't know how the student was doing at all. And you meet with the parents, other than some generalities, it's not a very productive meeting, so I guess
Now you know what
feel-
teachers think.
Well, I'm saying, I would feel handy, I've been on the other end, but you have to run a credible meeting. I would feel handicapped, not knowing who's done well and who's not, and now they're saying, please renew, and I'm in the dark. So in terms of, I appreciate the logistics.
You guys haven't even had a chance to review the service agreements.
Well,
Mark,
Robert, when you ask about knowing more about what each party brings to this relationship, you're talking about what specific services VSBIT and Vermont NEA deliver? Is that your starting point?
No, what I'm saying is, what does an evaluation mean? That
that's a big
implies,
question.
in other words, not a listing of what one is supposed to provide, have the goods been delivered in a satisfactory way? That's the basis upon which a contract is awarded.
We can certainly share the evaluations of the past few years, if that would be helpful. They're not compelling reading, but it's certainly enlightening. The service agreements, and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but the service agreements, I think, spell out the respective duties of the two entities. Those two service agreements, plus the past evaluations, should, I think, give you a pretty good grounding on how the organization has functioned and the respective duties of each party.
So what does item E mean? What does service agreement evaluation mean?
In addition to the specific, I think what it means is, in addition to the specific duties that I, Laura, Bobby, Joe perform, what's expected of Vermont NEA and VSBIT, we have done evaluations of ourselves. We have been evaluated. I have been evaluated over the last few years. Of course I have. I submitted evaluations to this body, right?
Tracy, let him finish.
Yeah,
Right. I've submitted evaluations to the body. They were read. I was questioned about them. So that's been my evaluative experience in the context of my performance as a trust administrator. The question of what Vermont NEA brings beyond my services is another question. But as a personal on a personal matter, as a trust administrator, this body does have evaluations for the past few years that Vermont and EA has submitted.
So can I speak to the evaluative process as
Laura,
I
I think,
understand
Laura,
it?
did you were shaking your head. I'm not sure if that was a prompt to Tracy or not.
No.
So here's my recollection. Up until I think 3 years ago, there was no evaluation, service agreements were renewed. And the board changed, and there's been a lot of changes over time that we could get into, but I don't think they're relevant. I think it was 3 years ago, and we could check the minutes to find out, that the board said, they wanted to hear from both organizations. They wanted to both understand what we did, and Visbit's service agreement says wellness administration financial, it doesn't say much, right? So Visbit outlined what that is. It doesn't mean it's what you want in the future, but it's what currently we do. We gave a draft scope of services, it's out on the web. So the board wanted to know more, what did we do? And we provided some documents and then how well were we doing it? Which is a different thing, right? So here's what you want from us, here's our evidence that we've done it, or here's our pointing out where we haven't quite measured up. So there are some documents that have been provided. I've written them on behalf of Visbit. It hasn't been an evaluation of me or my staff. It's been an evaluation of Visbit. We do these things. Some of them I do, some of them other people do. Last year, we pointed out where we are not doing well, and that was the reason that we hired Bobby Joe full-time, because we didn't have the capacity to do everything we needed to do, and it led to a budget thing. So those are probably buried in the Dropbox somewhere. I can pull them all together so you can look at that history.
Here's
So I have a point of
Time
clarification.
out. Peggy, no, I owed Peggy that, Fran.
Thank
See, it's
I'm-
interesting.
I just wanted, on this,
Right.
the letter from, requesting action for Visbit board regarding agreement, right? That's the one that you're suggesting that you and Robert and their chairs, meet. Would the purpose of that meeting be to look at future, service agreements? And does E, the service agreement evaluation, does that deal with evaluating what they've done now? So the two are actually not,
Well, you're asking what would happen at this meeting.
so if you have that meeting to sort of set some parameters to what a more, more common or in sync service agreements should look like between these organizations or these boards, that could be done because it's looking to the future, whereas this is evaluation that we need to do of how, whatever, they've
Yeah, it's like, in fairness to some people who do evaluations and anyhow, sometimes evaluations point to the future, change expectations that people have. We can't, I guess the way, who said this? A lot of people say this. You can have anything you want, but we can't have everything we want. We are a group of 6 people, 5 of whom are gainfully employed and have a lot on their plate outside of this room, and one of whom will typically be in state once he comes back at the end of April for a long time. So my time is actually available to do a lot of stuff. We've met once, twice, this is our 3rd meeting since the creation of this board, not counting an annual meeting. That's not a lot. I mean, that's 3 half days, not even, that we haven't met. We can't do everything, and we can't do it in a sequence that each of us would prefer. I think of the evaluations as an element of what we do, but it's not the most significant aspect of what we do here. The most significant aspect of what we do here is to arrange for the continuation of those services about which we have no real doubt. And so I think frankly that the request, I don't know whose request it is, but the request to delay the evaluation and focus on the roles discussion, which relates more to what Peggy was talking about before, what are the expectations what's the ground on which we reside and on which we build this organization? And a lot of what we do, resides in the hands of these three people. And we don't, and they don't have clear delineation of their own goals. We have to get something accomplished along these lines, and waiting until we have time to do everything in perfect fashion, which is my preference, is not gonna happen. We can't do everything. So the question before us is, what shall we do to move the work of the organization with respect to service agreements forward? Robert?
Go ahead, I'll leave you.
Well, I get to make that decision.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was just gonna say,
So would you like Tracy to speak
Well,
first?
I would, because I
Go
want
ahead.
to change something I was gonna say.
Don't
Please,
take
go
me
ahead.
too
I'm thinking,
seriously.
yeah, I'm thinking of, like these.
So, I agree with the intent of what you're saying, Joel. I wanna be clear, because I did try to speak a long time ago and, have been waiting my turn. That the evaluations that this body has asked for are evaluations of Vermont NEA and VISBIT. They are not evaluations of the employee, and I know there was historical confusion about that, but I wanna take yet another opportunity to be clear that our job is to evaluate the delivery of services based on the contract we have with the two organizations we contract with. And for that matter, we can do more of a thorough job with Blue Cross Blue Shield, but I think we do that pretty informally, or pretty thoroughly anyway, and have revised our contracts accordingly. I think you would find that the evaluative process would be hugely helpful, especially to new board members, to understand the roles and responsibilities of our current contracted service providers and what they contribute to the organization. And I'm gonna foreshadow that I will not support foregoing the evaluative process. I would add that while I agree with the goals that you posit, Joel, about the importance of looking forward and prospectively about how we contract with our partners, the point that you made about the lack of people's current knowledge about the operations, organizations, and function, our newness, is exactly the reason that I'm not comfortable delegating conversations about service agreements outside of a full board conversation. So I will foreshadow again that I will not support that delegation at this time. At some point in the future, I might be comfortable with that, but given where we are as a board, I think it's critical that we attend very closely to the work that had been framed of the past, understanding the way we work now and how well it is or is not working, and our processes be designed to enhance the full board understanding of that until we are at a place where we can delegate.
Could you outline for us the point at which you would be more comfortable in whatever it is you said you won't support? There are two things, I think. I'm not sure anybody suggested foregoing the evaluation process.
Well, yes, it's right here in the note, in the agenda.
Well, it says request to delay it, didn't say forego it.
Yeah.
That's all right, you didn't have it in front of you. And then the delegation notion that I raised. What would work for you?
Yeah, it's just that,
It's one furthest to the right.
Yeah, push a button.
Okay.
No,
Keep going.
over,
it looks
over,
like, it looks.
there you
Yep.
go.
Yeah, it's just that
Yeah, it's right here, always.
Good work.
I'd like to continue our evaluative process as it's been scheduled for years, and would prefer to delay a review and redefinition of roles and responsibilities until that evaluation is complete and the full board has an understanding of the roles and responsibilities that we are proposing might change. And I would like to have a full board conversation with VISBIT as was requested. By them.
So there's no circumstance under which you would enable a delegation?
I can't
Is that
think of
not-
one at this time.
You didn't say that. Peggy, and then,
Can you clarify what's the time frame for the current expectation of service agreements?
The current time frame is evaluations are an April agenda item, so that there can be thoughtful deliberations and communications, and contracts need to be renewed by July 1st. Is that right, Laura?
The April meeting is when we would.
I think the import of Bob's letter, if I remember right, is that we basically extend the life of the current agreement until September 1st. So that we have time to resolve.
It's not how I read the letter, but I can't speak on behalf
The
of
letter said, agree in advance that the parties can and will execute an amendment to capture the new agreement. And it said here, what do you say, automatic renewal? Allow the automatic renewal of the service contract to renew.
Can you keep reading?
Okay, so
Final
it's
date
what?
September 1st.
Pardon me? Oh, okay.
Agree on a target date of September 1st.
First,
Complete discussion of revised
clarified
terms.
terms with an amendment, right.
So
The
it's
contract
not-
be executed,
It's not
sorry.
entirely clear. What Bob wants is continuation of the current agreement, at least until September. And he wants 3 years, and I think that's a significant issue. Probably one that I'm for shadowing, probably one that we would agree to, but it's a significant issue, of whether to renew an agreement for 3 years.
Isn't it already in the agreement?
Right now, it's fine.
Tracy, how many times did I interrupt you over the last
I
5 years?
didn't interrupt you, you paused.
You did interrupt me. And what I was gonna say is, we're not even close to even yet, so keep it up, because the count is.
Are you saying that he is proposing basically a temporary extension of the service agreement?
I don't know that for sure, I didn't read it quite that way. Obviously, he would like commitment to a 3-year agreement, but it's plain that he's anticipating changes. And because he recognizes reality, he recognizes that we're not able really to pull this all together thoughtfully, perhaps until sometime in September.
So I was just gonna say, if I'm not interrupting you, if I can just suggest, but
I don't mind being
No, I don't
interrupted,
want-
I
I don't wanna drive
I just like it acknowledged.
Okay, is it okay if I?
No.
My concern, to reiterate to Peggy and Fran, is if the meeting that he wants is something in which discussion is going to be on a long-term renewal, I personally do not feel competent to accept the delegation of your authority and represent you, because I don't know who has done what well. So if it's a matter, I don't think that having a meeting, he said as soon as feasible, I don't think that's on fire. But I think we all have to know, yes, to Mark's point, who is supposed to do what. But listen, I'm supposed to do a lot of things. I'm being recorded here, but I'm not sure I do them well. Okay, so that's a separate issue. And I'd like to at least have an idea. And then, I'm one of the many Marxists on campus teaching your children, but unlike most of the others, I belong to the Groucho, not the Carl School. So I would say, I wouldn't accept a delegation. I wouldn't agree to represent a group that trusted me to represent them. I mean, at this point, I've got to say that. I don't, but if it's going to be just, let's get together and talk about, I don't know, the future of healthcare in 50 years.
I'm trying to ask him how many times he's used that line.
Oh, come on.
Is there conceptual agreement to all 3 organizations being part of the discussion?
No.
Can you explain
I
why?
wouldn't want to be negotiating 2 service agreements at the same time.
I don't think I said negotiate, I said,
I wouldn't want to be reviewing 2 service agreements at the same time.
Explain.
explain that, please.
They're 2 service agreements for entirely different services within different boards. This body ought to meet with each,
These people don't share roles across organizations?
their service agreements are entirely different.
I didn't say that. Their roles under those agreements are overlapping, are they not? In like a lot of ways.
I think that a review of service agreements ought to be separate.
I heard that. I asked you, do they share roles?
I think that's irrelevant to the negotiation of service agreements.
What were you saying, Joel? Was
But
it
you
Joel?
won't answer the question. I mean, I'm not cross-examining you, Tracy, I just asked you a simple question.
Joel, was that
Do you see a shared role or not?
I don't think that that's the function of a service agreement. That's a supervisory issue and/or a subsequent conversation that the board can have about,
Okay.
that would inform our discussions about service agreements once we've done an evaluation.
Did you say, were you suggesting, when you said conversation, did you mean a three-way board meeting? I was unclear. What did you mean by conversation?
Frankly, I'm not sure. What I meant initially was that 4 people would be in a room together. You, me, as the leaders of this board, and the leadership of their boards, Vermont EA and FISBIT, to talk through an array of matters that relate to VEHI's functioning and the services that each of those organizations provides. It's never happened, it ought to happen. And it probably will happen somehow, but, Fran?
It sounds like, I mean, it doesn't sound like we really know whether there's overlap, whether there's things that should be, that could be streamlined in some fashion. So I have no problem with folks from all 3 boards meeting at some point, just to have the conversation. They're not voting on anything, they're not signing off on any contracts. The service contracts still would have to come back to us for what VEHI uses, but for the 3 groups to have the conversation to see where there might be some overlap and commonality, I think could prove useful and create more efficient and effective dealings with these folks that we have service agreements with.
I think,
When the meeting is set up, I understand that you'd want to have more background and all, and apparently Bob, who wrote this letter, wants things extended into September, so there would be time for us, if we're gonna have a retreat, to also look at what the background and history is before we have the meeting with the other 2 groups.
yeah, you know, this is increasingly difficult to conceptualize. I think the notion of that 3-part meeting came to my mind in reading Bob's letter, where I can't find it, but he said that somebody ought to be putting together the agenda for the joint meeting.
Talked about the board each
Permit
designates.
respected board designees to confer and agree in advance on agenda time.
Right, board
That's es-
designees.
That's essentially what I meant, excluding current staff. That's what I meant. I was trying to conform in my thinking, which incorporates VISBIT and Vermont EA, with Bob's request. That's all that was. Laura pointed out that we really have to address as a board the conflict of interest issues even before we resolve almost any of this stuff too. So, you know, your guess is as good as mine, folks. I could make decisions on my own. No, I can't. But I know what I would, it'd be relatively simple for each of us to go into a room alone and come up with a plan or decisions about each of these 4 items: the conflict of interest issue, the evaluations issue, the role differentiation issue, and how to go about the process of renewing these agreements. We have to do it in the same room together, and we have a limited amount of time. So I think the remaining question is, how would you like to go about doing that?
Just a piece of this I'll address, which is, I think we said, in the context of a discussion on our mission and what we're doing, and this was what I said earlier, as predicted, we won't get to item 12, but I only voted to keep item 12 on the agenda to have a discussion on the rules among the staff to clarify. So I think that would be part of whenever we have this day. And again, I would just reiterate, whether it's me or whoever else goes to Joel, and I would say it's for you, I think unless this is purely a social interaction meeting, if it's going to be a substantive meeting, I'd want to go in knowing who has done what and what has been done from our perspective well or less well. And I feel very handicapped.
For purposes of drafting an agenda, though, laying the foundation for future discussions, do you
Right.
still feel like you need that much preparation if you had the
Not
service?
that much, but I need
Right.
some.
Well, I think if you had the service agreements in your possession and the other and the past evaluations, I actually think I think you're gonna find it's not that complicated to understand what the parties have done. For purposes of the board chairs getting together and talking about an agenda and future meetings.
And I guess my question is, what is the purpose of that meeting, other than it's social?
Well,
Other than setting an agenda.
the purpose was to Yeah, set an agenda, just create.
Identify the issues and
Really, you can't set an agenda without having some baseline information about what you want to talk about as a group, but.
But I actually think, Robert, you could certainly be prepared for that kind of conversation. If we equipped you with the documents you need to do so.
We could.
To set an agenda for the whole board?
Well,
I'm not sure what comes after that agenda.
Well, you know, the agenda was,
we're not that far along. I just know that we're not prepared, I don't think, to reach consensus about responding only to Bob on behalf of Visbit without incorporating Vermont EA into the process. And beyond that, we're not prepared apparently to even reach the point of meeting about the service agreements before we resolve several other major issues, which I don't think we can do in sufficient time and fashion.
clarification,
Yes.
does Vermont NEA have the same timeline as Visbit?
No.
For
I
contract renewal,
mean, yeah, contract renewal, yes,
for evaluation?
Either, all.
both, yeah, I guess.
So
it
you
is.
can look at the service agreements online, you go to the VEHI website, the bottom, is a membership tab in the bottom of the homepage. Click on the membership tab, you'll see both service agreements.
Dropbox.
They're also in the Dropbox, but it might sometimes be easier to get them online. Vermont NEA's contract is for 1 year. It does not have an auto renew clause, and it's explicit about the evaluation. Visbit's contract, because it hasn't been reworked in 5 years, doesn't have the explicit evaluation, but Visbit does the same evaluation process as Vermont NEA, and the intent had been to include it in the next service agreement and to mirror the evaluation and the renewal kinds of provisions, but they've had different timeframes, so they haven't synced yet.
Martha has a hard stop.
I have a hard stop.
We have to get to item 11.
Is there any disagreement with the notion of authorizing the staff to hire somebody to help resolve the backlog, is that the right term?
It's the data
The
passage.
outstanding TPA reconciliations. So,
Mark and I have spent an
Go for
an
it.
exorbitant amount of time working on these, and we just don't have the manpower. And we have a great candidate that could help us with
So you
that
have-
for a temporary time.
Do you have an estimate?
$6,000, about 2 months.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
Who
you.
seconded?
Well, Peggy and I both did, so pick one, pick one.
I know a retired attorney who's got time on his hands.
I'd like to say, because you can stop me now, but the investment update was an update. It's not an action item request. And the plan was that we would implement your policy that was adopted in 2017. If you feel like, and there was no action requested, if you feel like you are not ready for us yet to implement the policy from September of 17, then it will go on the next agenda. Otherwise, we will implement the policy as described in the notes. So I just need direction on whether we're on a hold, because it wasn't an action item, it was an FYI only.
Implement.
Consider us informed.
Thank you. Just didn't want to overreach.
Okay, I have to leave, sorry.
Thank you.
I'm
Happy
sorry
board
too.
meeting.
I'm sorry for the rest of us. We won't take any votes, but we need to have some general direction to move here. I guess what I will do is propose the following. On the April meeting, we will address the conflict of interest issue. Well, that's as far as I can go. I'm left with a question. Who conducts this evaluation? My understanding, if I have one, is that Visbit and Vermont submitted something in
That's
writing.
correct.
And
I
did
would
the
talk
board,
about it.
did the board accept it?
And I would prefer it not be marked, so that it doesn't feel evaluative of you. It's about the
Well,
services.
that's up to Vermont to
That's right, I'm just telling you.
But it's
Well, you're not telling us.
impossible though to really pull me out of this, right? I mean, just on a practical basis, you can't do it because I'm pretty much it. right? So you can't have an evaluation of Vermont EA without referencing me. That's not actually an issue for me, you know? Well, I mean, lots of folks contribute to VEHI at Vermont EA, but on a day-to-day basis, that's much of my work, right?
Tracy, do you have the same concern about your being involved directly in the evaluation of this bit?
I expect this bit to present the evaluation.
That's not my question. My question is Laura's involvement in it. Do you have a problem with that?
I don't, only because Laura hasn't felt that it was evaluative. I'm concerned that Mark felt it was evaluative of him.
Well, it was, now it isn't, right? Is that really all you're saying, is that the evaluation is of the organization and not the individual?
That's correct.
Message received or transmitted, I don't know if you can accept it. So my question, I guess, resolves into, are we going to force the evaluation to occur at the end of April in spite of the request to allow the service agreement evaluation to await the discussion of roles and responsibilities? For my money, I care less about what has been done than with resolving what will be done and by whom. So, some guidance.
You know, on a personal note, it is purely personal. That evaluation process, whether I'm at the center of it or it's about me and everyone else at Vermont EA who contributes to VEHI, it's an enormous amount of work. And frankly, I think you know everything I've been doing over the course of the last 15 months. And you probably have a pretty good idea where a lot of my time's been devoted over the course of the last 15 months.
All of it.
And while we can certainly reduce all of that to writing, I'm not certain it's going to shed any enlightenment on the last 15 months that you're not already aware of. And it's probably time better spent somewhere else. If it has to be deferred, that's fine. I mean, if down the road it's necessary, fine. But at the moment, there are so many pressing issues that need to be addressed. And
Yeah, I don't know that we have a full time for a discussion of that, given time is up.
Well, that's fine, but you made this an issue for us. And
It's on the agenda. It's on the agenda.
How would you like to see this resolved? Where would you like us to go?
What do you
Give us some
suggest we do?
specifics.
I
What do
am
you
not
want?
comfortable with the delay. It's in the contract.
So when should we be doing this
What do
then?
you suggest we do?
It should be an April agenda item.
What?
the evaluation.
What does that mean?
Vermont NEA should present resources that reflect the organization's work to fulfill the service agreement with
Okay, I got that.
VEHI, that we have an opportunity to review and discuss and
And
consider
visit,
as we look to.
And visit as well in accordance
Renew.
with, right? And so what do we do with it?
What action do you expect us to take?
We give feedback on the quality of the services, and in the case of Vermont NEA, it's used to inform continuation of services. And this year, it would be the same for this bit because it's up. We could let it, we make a decision to automatically renew, but we've got to have a conversation, an evaluative conversation that leads to, are we renewing
So
our contract?
is there a way to truncate this so that neither Vermont NEA nor Bisbee has to spend an inordinate amount of time presenting a document that contains information that at least intuitively we know?
I would argue we don't, since some of you are brand new to the board, and the board of the past has determined that it's super important that we do that.
If it helps, I think you alluded to a temporary rollover of the contract for X months.
Now, I guess I suggested it without justification, but maybe we can.
I'm just saying, to me, there might be a false urgency here, but I insist, I think as a public body, we're under scrutiny. If we're renewing contracts, we should at least say we've looked at
Sure.
how the parties who are getting it have been doing. And
Is there
so if it's a
a-
matter of we have a timing crunch, can't that be
Is there an
squared?
evaluation instrument?
evidence, we've asked for evidence to be provided
There's no instrument,
with,
there is instrument.
there's a framework that we've asked for evidence to be provided in, yes.
Well, so.
But we've
so
tried to
We've
give
looked at the scope of
flexibility.
services in the
Yeah.
contract as a
Is
stuff
it
in
fair
our
to say, so that you're not pulling an all-nighter for some artificial deadline, that these contracts with Visbis or any can be rolled over on an ad hoc basis?
I understand that, even if we get an extension, you know, to put it in academic terms, if our due date is put out in the
Right.
future, we still don't have time to do this. To do everything that needs to be done, given our collective schedules and meeting schedule.
Can
And
I-
Tracy's insisting that we conduct this evaluation in April. I'm not against it, but I don't want to force the staff, which is of either organization, and as well as these three guys, to spend valuable professional time on a paper exercise. Now, I know you will disagree with that, that's my feeling, and so I'm trying to find a way of accommodating both interests.
I appreciate that. Can I offer a general set of feedback?
No,
It's gonna
we need to resolve this.
It's gonna be specific to this. It's gonna address this
And it's
specifically
not
and
general,
everything.
but go ahead.
No, it will be, it's universal. It's like when a new principal comes in. My belief is it's really important when there's a new leader in an organization or a new set of leaders, that we take dedicated time to understand the organization and the operations. And that means following the routines, norms, and of the past and of the organization. Change in the future could be good, but it needs to be informed by experience and deep understanding of the current state of things. And we have been sidetracked for the last several meetings because we've been prioritizing things that people want to change. And my wish would be even that we table the conflict of interest to a full day retreat perhaps. That needs to not wait as long, but we do have, and that we work to the best of our ability within the documents, bylaws, and framework that we have to keep this organization on track, make sure we have service agreements in place to do the work that we need to do before we start making significant changes. That's my thematic response. Therefore, I would request that the April agenda reflect the work that we typically do in April. And we take a deep breath and agree to a thoughtful multi-step plan for engaging with VISBIT, since they asked for that. We not presume that Vermont NEA even wants the same thing, and come back to focusing on the work plan that was laid out based on, by our staff, based on the work that we need to do, and the operations of the board in the past. And again, come back to learning
I don't know
before
where to
you
go with
change.
it. I do know this, that there will be at some point, there has to be a three-way meeting. These organizations are doing the same work in so many different ways, and they've never talked to each other except these three people. And so the understanding that.
And maybe I could be convinced of that.
Well,
Can I just show you the people, the agenda, where I had this? And the first, after reviewing minutes, et cetera, act on the pharmacy formulary. In red, identify work of the board and update the annual work plan. So that seems to me what, unless we.
Well, that's not what she's saying. What she's saying is we should have the thoroughgoing, baseline retreat kind of stuff before we do anything, except for the evaluation, which is scheduled for April. Isn't that right?
What's our normal work for April?
Evaluation,
Yeah?
that's about it.
Well, we can review the work plan then.
Huh?
Review the work plan.
I mean, we are so off normal,
I know.
but normal work for April would be to start thinking about service agreements, evaluations, budget,
I understand.
To start.
And now we can't.
to complete by the end of June. You know, you start, so you have multiple
Start in April.
meetings to think about it and do your work.
Review
and-
service code
not just be
for
reactive
possible
at the end.
revisions. That's it, April to June, that's what it says.
Right. Right. But we need to agree on a process. And I think I've made myself clear over the years, the way to make this organization reputation rebuilt is by treating each other, I need a different word for equally, but in like manner.
We need our reputation rebuilt.
That's my opinion. I've said it several times. We don't need to worry about it here, but that's what I think. We have 40,000 people out there depending on us for the provision of high-quality health benefits. And like it or not, they're entitled to confuse VEHI with the mess that occurred in the rollout of franchise and such. Be that as it may.
So aren't we saying the same thing?
Well, I wish. I don't think so, but I wish.
Forgive me. Aren't we saying April's meeting, we are going to look at the annual work plan and update it? Part of the, and then begin the process, because the work plan for April to June is renew service agreements. What information, and I'm prejudging what we do on the agenda, what information could be brought to us in April so that we could become more informed about renewing them, and I'm sort of harping on it again, if need be. I don't think a meeting is as urgent, that can wait till we're more informed, but
I didn't come up with I didn't request the meeting, I'm just
Yeah.
proposing
He
that
seemed
we
to be-
acknowledge that there are 3 organizations involved in this endeavor.
But I think what the urgency is the formal contract, if it's possible to roll it over for X amount of time, that gives us some time. Or am I barking up the wrong tree?
No, I mean, you're trying to be helpful, which is very good. But you didn't mention the word evaluation in there, I think.
Well, again, we have to be seen to be looking at the parties before we renew them for 3 years as they ask or whatnot. I don't know what that word means, you'd have to tell us what evaluation means, I don't know.
Well, you're going to, apparently, unless something changes very quickly here, you're going to be getting an evaluation or 2 evaluation documents in April. And that will have some integration with the service agreements. And as it's
In
happened,
the
I mean, that's what
midst of the rest of their work life.
and we're just gonna have to, devote time to producing those.
And after we read them, we would be in a position to say, item X or item Y was adequately done or not, is that?
That's up for you to decide.
Individuals will have their say, I guess. They can have their
I
say
would
without
suggest-
that document.
That since there's apparently been flexibility, that you minimize what you have to do for the evaluations.
Absolutely.
Bring it to us, we don't take any action on a new contract, and we have the evaluation. But I would suggest that you minimize what you feel you need, whatever this requires.
Along those lines, this may be really, unfair coming from somebody like me. Can you produce what you want to produce on 1 page, or slop over on the 2 pages, and accept a limit like that, so that we don't put you under an enormous burden to produce stuff? We know intuitively that you're doing a hell of a lot of work. We know that Visbit's doing other work, we know that Vermont AA is doing other work. Yeah, does that make any sense at all? Just to, or can you both cabal to submit something equivalent with each other, so that neither of you will be more criticized than the other?
I mean, I've gone down,
I don't wanna.
we have different styles
I
in
know.
how we approach it, and,
Yeah.
and I speak to different work than Mark
Right.
speaks to, because I'm looking at the whole organization. I'll go back and see what I wrote last year and use that as a
I'll look
starting
at it.
point. I don't remember what I wrote.
Yeah, so
I also think too, the conflict of interest issue needs to be on the April agenda,
it does.
because it has direct ramifications for the voting on the
does.
service agreements.
You've said it, Laura has said it, I know it, I've known it for years, and we've enjoyed it, huh? What?
We've only had a policy for a year.
No, but we've had conflict of interest issues for a long time, and we've slept over it, and I say we, because I was part of it, we slept over it for years, and I think it's obviously time to join it.
So the April agenda, it seems to me,
Work
it's
plan update,
work plan,
evaluation, conflict of interest.
evaluation, and if possible, and COI. Whatever.
What about roles?
Well,
Could we
That-
delay those until May?
Well, how do you do that? I mean, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just thinking out loud. How do you
That's
guys,
tied into
how do you
the
guys,
schedule.
how do we,
We're functioning. We haven't had a chance to have the role discussion because we're just,
We're buried alive.
I know
That's,
that.
that's the fact of
It's
the matter, we're
insane.
buried
So-
alive right now.
what's gonna get slapped together right now for me is the roles discussion. I can do the evaluation sort of, then the roles, cause I've done the eval and it's it's an update.
just,
The role is
change
that
the
something
date,
we haven't
yeah.
created yet, and that's gonna take more bandwidth.
yeah,
Joel, do we need a day in May, because that's sort of
well,
it,
certainly we do.
for the retreat when we tackle these bigger issues, so that we can then start moving?
At this point, we can't schedule it.
We can schedule 5 of us and see, we can, if we can have any overlap at all, or 8 of
It
us.
can be
see.
tentative until, we have a couple of days, and tentative until we find one that everybody can go.
Where are you on this? Are you already on?
Oh, right there in front of me.
We're not gonna vote on
I'm
it.
really good at finding
Are
quotes.
you on, like, discuss future agenda, is that where we're
I
at?
guess so.
Yeah.
Martha was really struggling with times in May.
But you successfully avoided.
So I have right now in my tentative minutes that on 8D and E, there was no consensus to take, there was no consensus on a response to visitor at this time, and there was no consensus to delay the evaluation. And then I think you're on the develop agenda for the next meeting section.
We're gonna-
Well, apparently, you just said we're gonna do the evaluation at the April meeting.
We'll try to, we'll start it.
So that's the response to the request to
Did
delay.
that request of delay come from you guys? Because it didn't come from these guys, right?
No, it came from us.
It came from us.
All right, so the staff asked for a delay,
Oh,
and we're not giving it to them?
Well, I said, I have no problem delaying it, but I don't wanna put the cart before the horse. I don't wanna renew. In other words, that's what I kept saying. It's fine to delay the evaluation, but then can we put in abeyance the 3-year renewal that they're asking for? I don't mind 30 days, you see what I mean?
Do you think it's possible, both of you, that your organizations would agree to a 2 or 3 month extension?
I can't speak for the organization.
I know.
I've been directed not to
I
speak
got
for the
it, I'm sorry.
organization.
I'm sorry, I
I have to
apologize.
call Bob Giroux.
No, I will, but I'll get hammered for that. So,
well,
Well,
if the
do it.
request to delay came from the staff, I think we should honor that, and if it pushes everything back, so be it.
that's
In
the way
which
it
case,
goes.
talk to,
But everything includes trying to renew it, that's what I'm saying.
well, figure out a way to push it back.
That's,
I will, on behalf of the organization, unless somebody says I shouldn't even do that, I will contact Bob Giroux, and I will also contact Dante, who's the chairman of the Vermont EA's board.
You
Let
should
him know-
ask for
and-
formal authorization to do that.
I move that Joel be able to go ahead and try to figure out a time when we can push everything ahead.
well,
And I will
it's
do
not-
so,
That's not the wording, that Jewel be empowered to ask for a temporary extension on the service contracts, is that
I understand that to be the case.
right? That's,
Then I'll second
And I-
your motion.
And I will provide them with sufficient background so they'll understand the reasoning and beg their.
But now we're taking a vote with one person missing.
Well, I guess the answer is, the answer lies, I did say that Martha wouldn't take any votes. All right? What are we gonna do?
All right, so we could do the evaluations in April?
if you say.
Minimal,
We'll
please.
we'll get them done, let's get them done,
Minimal.
we'll get them
I
done.
think you have
Yes, I'm gonna do it, I
sufficient
wanna get the damn
guidance.
thing done,
Yeah,
tired of this discussion.
Yeah.
Get the damn thing done.
Can we come up with a couple of dates in May?
Doesn't feel it's important to evaluate millions of dollars in the case of
That's not what we're saying.
VEHI
please.
and
What is
hundreds
it
of
saying?
thousands of dollars in the case of Vermont MEA
That's not what
in
we're saying.
expenditures. That's what I'm saying.
That's not what we're saying.
I hear you. I want to be sure that I'm heard.
No one's against evaluation.
What you just said is really incorrect. That's all. I don't know why you said it that way. So, we don't know the agenda, but Robert and I will work on the agenda in accordance with the protocol after we receive.
I will digest from
You
the
will try.
minutes what kinds of things came up here, and I will give you some other
Okay.
A
comments with Mark
revised,
and.
a
Good.
revised framework for the.
Right, a
agenda?
framework, knowing that the two of you need to set it.
Thank you.
We do need to try to find dates And we will obviously.
Is somebody getting back to Bob, who wants to reply before March 25th? Even to let him know that
Was I,
Who did he send the letter to? You?
he sent it to all of us, the board.
the board?
So to get back to him and say that.
Look,
we
here's
I
the
can't
still
thing.
think that that's
I
the
can- I can-
responsibility
I
of the
can
board
say this.
chair to
I'm
get
okay
back.
with this, I just wanna make sure
I
there's a
can be
response going to him.
overruled by the full board here. I told Martha we wouldn't vote. You guys and I can reach a different conclusion and explain to Martha what happened. If there is unanimity among the five of us. If there isn't, our decision protocol being what it is, it fails.
Is it a fair statement
So,
to say?
so there's, I think the motion, and there needs a second, a motion is to authorize the chair to communicate back to Bob Giroux and to incorporate in his communications with Don Tinney on behalf of Vermont EA, a request that they agree to what amounts to a 2 or, I'll say 3, a 2 or 3 month continuation of the current service agreements while we work it all out. Fair enough?
Is that helpful?
Is there a motion to that effect?
I
Yeah, I
think,
thought,
Well, I'm asking, oh, sorry,
Is that what?
is that helpful from your perspective? That's why I suggested it.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the evaluation's coming forward in April. Presumably it'll be taken care of at the April meeting. The work will continue to go on.
yeah, but I think that, because.
I'm
you
trying to
gotta respond.
accommodate
So, yes.
Tracy's underlying concerns about you guys not having a sufficient background to know what the heck you're making decisions about.
Right.
And in order to accomplish that, we cannot, there aren't enough meeting dates available to the 9 of us between now and the end of June to fulfill all of that. So the notion is, on that basis, to extend the lives
Right.
of the agreements.
By how long?
I'll say 2 or 3 months to give us a little flexibility.
Okay.
But I think our goal, I know you're just writing it, our goal should be 2 months if we can possibly limit it to
I
that.
have a suggestion procedurally that's tight and consistent with what you told Martha before you left. Our communication protocols allow the board chair and the vice chair to communicate jointly on behalf of the board on positions taken. We haven't formally taken a position to seek an extension of,
I'm informing them of our interest in learning, of their willingness to accept an extension. That's background work.
yes, so I'm okay with that. We should probably take more formal action at the next meeting.
That's the whole
That's
point.
fine, so we're all,
We
It's
can't
not
take,
you,
we
it's
can't,
you.
we can't take that
I'm
action.
not sure how you and Robert are gonna work it out, but you've gotta communicate
You,
jointly.
yeah, you don't need a motion, she's saying. Our communication protocol was,
You're allowed to communicate on behalf of the board with Robert on positions taken by the board.
Have we taken a position formally?
We
Yes.
haven't, that's the hard part.
We have.
well, now we have.
Can you just let him know that we haven't taken a position, and we'll be in touch?
That's what you can, that, yes. And that our inclination is even what we discussed. You could share what we discussed, but we haven't taken a position.
And you could inquire as to their willingness to
That's how Jill just
have
Okay.
accept an
Yeah.
extension. But it's not because the board asked for it, it's because by doing that, you're getting the information the board needs.
All right, now that requires us to do a lot of work between now and into the summer.
Yep,
I'm sorry to all you educators.
yep.
So there was not a motion, is that correct? But
Correct.
there's an understanding that you will communicate not only to Visbit, but also to Vermont NEA through Don Tinney, on the status and, on
Their
their
willingness,
willingness, okay, to extend.
short-term extension.
short term, it's 2 or 3 months, I think, just to be, because they'll say how long. All right. Is I'm sorry, is May 6th now on everybody's schedule already?
No,
I have a board meeting on May 6th.
I got
No,
May-
that's March 6th, never mind.
I got I got the entire week
It's
of,
today.
my recollection is that that week, we were going to try to find a date.
That's
Yeah, we
exactly
did.
right.
And, but I also recall, and I hope I don't it's a poor recall, that Martha had some concerns about that.
Yes, it was her, she was the conversion of their system that she
Right,
was struggling with.
That week?
Yeah, no, she doesn't, I think she didn't know
She
if every
couldn't
day that
plan
week, but she
beyond
couldn't
the
plan.
end of
Then,
April at
all
that
right.
point.
Well, then let me ask, are there days unavailable to the rest of us?
On
And
that
I
week?
think Friday is unavailable, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of that week.
We've got a call on.
Afternoons were available,
Afternoons are fine, right?
Okay.
which has been the protocol.
I'm correct.
Not this guy.
Well, Tuesday and Thursday I have class at noon till 1:30, and then again 3:30 to 5.
That's
So
not
Monday,
very-
Wednesday.
That's not very nice.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm fine.
All right,
Friday
Monday,
you said is
Wednesday.
off.
All right.
So Monday and Wednesday is.
Monday, Wednesday. Can anybody here not meet on Wednesday afternoon?
I could be clear of that,
You can what?
I can't.
You can't do Wednesday?
But in the Agency of Education,
You do Monday?
I can't do Monday.
You can't do Monday.
No.
You do Tuesday.
Oh, so that week's out.
Okay, that week's
I
out.
could do Tuesday or
Doesn't-
So you
Thursday.
can do Tuesday?
Possibly do Tuesday, yes, if that works, I would just,
Well, it
Cancel
doesn't work.
class?
I have class till 1:30, the other class is a work session, it's the consulting class, so they might be meeting that, it's the last Tuesday of the
I
semester,
can't
they'll
do
work.
Tuesday anyway.
Okay.
Or-
All right.
How about Thursday?
The week is out.
I can't do
Week's
Thursday.
out.
The week is out.
What day can you do?
In my,
How about, all right, let's
In
move to the
May.
next, move to the next week. I really think we obviously have to do this. We can't make decisions about anything while we're here. We at least should schedule meetings while we're here.
Saturday mornings?
yeah,
Huh?
I'm not.
Saturday mornings?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
That's it, Saturday, we meet
No,
on
no.
Saturday.
the second and fourth weeks of the month are generally better, the first and third weeks of the month.
Well, I don't know
First
what
and
you're,
third
what-
Mondays.
what's the.
What dates
third-
you looking
what
at
are you looking
specifically?
So
The second week is the sixth, second full week.
could do Tuesday the 14th. I have time in the afternoon. That's what I have that week.
Anybody,
I'm just
Can't.
checking exam schedule, I'm sorry, the week of the 13th?
the 14th?
14th?
Can others do the 14th in the afternoon?
What
Bear
time?
with me.
One or later.
Tuesday the 14th.
1:30?
Yes?
Bobby Joe
Works
can't,
for
but
me.
Mark and I can fill her in. She's got a conference
Tuesday
that
the
week.
14th, I'm sorry,
Tuesday the 14th, 1 o'clock? All right, so we just have to get. 1:30's fine,
Yeah.
yeah, gives you a little more time.
Two
No, no,
classes.
So
that's
we're
fine.
gonna say May 14th at 1:30 here. I'm gonna talk to Martha.
All right, let's keep going. I don't know what to say. I think every week is a little crazy. And Tracy can't meet every week. So how about the week of Memorial Day? Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday? 28th?
What week, I'm sorry, is that the
week
week
of
of
the
the
27th.
27th?
Yeah.
28th's good with me, 29th's good with me too.
I could do
Robert?
Friday the 24th.
Well, we're not,
We're not in that week, okay.
Go to the next week, 27th.
you had us skip right by that earlier.
Sorry, I'm too slow. 27th is Memorial Day.
The 28th? What?
I'm playing phone tag, I've just gotta find out if I have an overseas gig, because they mentioned late May. It's doubtful
That would be late May.
Yeah, but it's doubtful they do it on Memorial Day, but unfortunately I ran out, I didn't connect.
All right,
So I'd say tentatively it's possible, when were you saying? What day?
28th?
28th. Would your gig be early in the week or later in the week?
If it would, see, if it's
Travel.
Thursday, Friday, I've gotta
Yes.
leave, I leave 2
You
days
gotta
before
leave.
because it's Europe, so it's like,
Right.
if it was Thursday, Friday, I'd have to leave Tuesday. It's.
28th is out for me.
Oh,
Okay.
30th would work.
I can't.
Robert may be leaving on the
well,
3rd.
no, what about the 27th? Oh, that's Memorial Day, forgetting it there.
That's why your calendar looked open.
I beg your pardon?
That's why your calendar looked open.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're into June.
So I could do Wednesday, June 5th in the afternoon.
All right, Wednesday, June 5th.
Won't work for me.
All right,
Won't work for you.
Thursday, you can't do the 6th?
Thursday, June 6th.
6th?
I'm out of town the whole week of the
Okay.
3rd.
All right, week of the 10th. Same.
I'm all dressed up and I know where to go.
Well, I do, I know where you're going.
Um,
Tracy, speak. That week.
Tuesday, the 11th.
All right,
Good with me.
going once?
That can work.
All right.
I'm sorry.
1:30 again?
1:30?
I hesitate to say any more, so that's it. So,
Good enough?
What about a day?
yeah, oh. one of
It
these
could be a
is-
Saturday,
Yeah.
could be in June, could be in
I
July.
don't want to do that. What do you guys prefer
What?
for an all-day
Half
gathering?
day?
I have no problem with Saturdays, but if we move into July, I won't be here.
Got it.
Mayor
You'll be
Jill?
to all of July?
Uh,
I was
let's
gonna
just
say the
she's-
same
let's
thing.
just say she's on a break.
Mayor
It's the
Jill?
only month that I can get around and do different things outside of the state.
If
Mayor
it's a
Jill?
Saturday, can we do it in April or May?
Yeah, May, April,
Well,
May.
forget,
The
forget,
thing is we
forget
don't have a
April,
facilitator,
but, anytime
we
in
don't have
May,
an agenda, we don't have data to share with you until mid-May. If we wanna include the data, which we don't need to include the data, we can do the other work.
June eighth.
What about June 8th?
That would be Saturday.
I will not be
No,
here.
my
I got
mother's
the-
not
I'm
in
reading
Thursday.
AP exams that week.
Some people get old.
What about
Tough choice,
Yeah, me and 1,000 history teachers.
tough choice, that's great.
May 25?
It's pretty absurd, actually.
May
That's
25th?
Memorial Day.
More than-
Oh, that's, sorry, May 18th, too soon, you want to do that?
We won't have the data.
Actually, we'll have the data, right?
What date would do?
Will it be useful?
Really? Actually, we've got a conversation with Prometheus on the 7th, so.
Right,
Will
that's
it
our
be
second
useful?
meeting with
I know,
Prometheus is on
I
the
know.
7th, so yes,
Sure.
by,
That's close, all right.
May
Why don't
18th?
you do like a doodle poll or something for a Saturday so Martha can be on it too?
Well, of course, we're gonna check with Martha, but if there are 8 of us, we don't need a doodle poll, we just need to check with Martha, right? So we have meetings scheduled tentatively
Just,
as follows. For real on April 29th, and after checking with Martha, May 6th, May 14th, and I'm skipping, June 11th, all of those at 1:30.
Oh, wait, May 6th?
no, we have
May
June
May,
6th, what?
no, we have April
We
29th,
cancel the 6th?
we have April 29th, May 14th, and June
14th.
11th.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, and
that's
June
way
11th, I'm
below.
sorry.
June 11th.
And May 18th for an all-day gathering of sorts, somewhere.
Well, we have $50,000 in the budget, so,
That's next year.
We may. If we put it
So
in.
where's your gig? All right, I guess that's enough. I don't presume to know how to manage this environment. I'll figure it out. So the April 29th thing, we're going to do something about work plans, something about evaluation,
So we'll take,
something about conflict of interest, and something about roles.
yeah.
Okay?
we are still doing something about roles
I
at
don't know
the
what to
April
say.
meeting.
Is that what we,
Yeah, I don't,
You asked us at the last meeting.
Do you need a motion to adjourn?
yes.
So moved.
I don't
I don't know if I'll have something on roles.
Second.
Thank you.
There you go.